actually read your book directly, so appreciate you for being here as well and all of your hard work. As you know, up until really the last Congress, I think it was Representative Burchett that was actually leading out the investigation solely on his own, so credit due where it's deserved. Mr. Burchett's been really, I think, at the forefront of this fight. We do have an opportunity right now where we are seeing not just a complete push for transparency out of the current administration on this topic, but also we have bicameral and bipartisan support on this. So thank you very much, Lou, for your help, and then also to the experts and people being here today to testify and really to tell us and help lead us out, the investigations with us. Again, this is a community effort. This is not just, Democrat, Republican thing, even just an American thing, right? There's a massive push for this for good reason. We know recently in working with the National Archives, they were able to actually update on the Archives website all things UAP. There will continue to be documents scanned and updated and be on that tab page. You citizen journalists can actually go forward, do the research yourself, help us ask the tough questions, and then I can also tell you that we have posted dates for the next UAP hearing. We are going to be doing two. One is going to be government focused. We are asking various appointees. I don't want to release the names yet, but we have been getting good response on them. We will make those names known soon, as well as military and or former military that will be coming forward. Also to note that we were told by one of Mr. Burleson's staffers that's helping us to lead out this investigation about someone that wants to come forward in regards to a crash retrieval program. And so that's pretty interesting to hear someone going on record about that. Obviously, we've had a lot of people try to dispel the research that the UAP community has done, and so we're just simply putting out the facts and letting the American people, and really the world, decide for themselves. But I'd also like to have some of my counterparts say a few things. So, Representative Burleson?
Thank you, Anna. I first want to just say thank you again to Tim for leading the charge on this. When it wasn't popular, it was difficult, and it took a lot of courage, and we all recognize that, and I just want to acknowledge that. And I want to say thank you to Anna for her leadership, and I'll tell you, she is amazing to work with. She is very humble in her attitude and her approach. She doesn't, she likes to, to let other people join in the credit, and she is a very gracious and good leader for this task force. I want to say thank you to everyone that has come forward, from Lou to Mr. Mellon to Mr. Brush and others that have taken bold risks, Mr. Graves who's here, who have taken a bold step and at the risk of their reputation and their career. There's a lot of people that have sacrificed their career in order to get information out to the American people. We are grateful for, as well, for the cooperation that we're getting with Tulsi Gabbard, and whose Director's Initiatives Group is actively harmonizing classification guides to facilitate responsible releases. She's been very effective with the JFK assassination records and others. And then the last thing I want to say is that this is not a one-time thing. This will not be. It's clear that this is not a one-time data dump. This is a systemic change to the process and the way that we are transparent with the American people. And with that, we're working on legislation that will put that into practice. And again, thank you for everyone for being here. I'm looking forward to today's hearing.
Thank you all for being here. I'll be very brief. Lou, thank you for the introduction. Thank my colleagues up here for their kind words. I'm not sure what that's all about. I think I'm buying pizzas after just saying they're crazy. I got a daughter that rides horses. I don't know how I'm going to get home today. But it is a pleasure being here, and I want to thank the people that are sitting right there, some dear friends of mine, people in the media and elsewhere that are always kind to me. We don't agree on a dadgum thing politically, but we do agree that this is the biggest cover-up of our lifetime, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And I want you folks to know out there that we believe, and for so many years, people that believe like we do have had to live in the shadows. And when you bring it up, you get criticized, and people say all kinds of awful things about you, and dadgum, I'm over that. We know this thing's covered up, and we're going to blow the dadgum lid off of it. So thank y'all for being here. Let's get on.
What I'd like to do is, because time is precious, especially for the members, obviously they have a real job to do. This is part of it, but they have a whole lot of other responsibilities. So with that said, I'd like to first begin by thanking specifically Representative Luna from the 13th District, if I'm not mistaken, of Florida, for her leadership in this particular forum and on this topic. This would not have been possible if it was not for Representative Luna in her pursuit of the truth. She has served her country quite honorably, and her husband as well. If any of you have been in the military, may have run across him. So on behalf of a very grateful nation, ma'am, thank you for what you continue to do, and your continued service to this nation and that of your family. It is greatly appreciated, and your service specifically as well with regard to the military, so thank you. Secondly, I'd like to thank Representative Eric Burleson. Somewhat newer to this topic than some of the other folks, maybe on the Senate side and even the House side, who has also championed truth and transparency within the American government. I would refer to him as a healthy skeptic, which I think is important. Right? Always keeping an open mind, allow the data to speak for itself. And in my interactions with Representative Burleson, I've seen him to be every time and exclusively honorable and truthful. And he is now, I think it's translating into the forum you see here with media present. We're going to have a very interesting conversation today. And again, this is only possible because of the three individuals up here. So if you have time later on, I would suggest you give him a good deal of thanks for what he is doing for our nation. And last but certainly not least is Representative Tim Burchett from Tennessee, who has been spearheading this topic for quite some time at great personal risk to his political career. As most of you know, that's one thing that politicians tend to avoid is risk, especially when it comes to election time. And Representative Burchett, I would probably define him as bringing a working man's perspective, a common sense perspective to the bureaucracy we call Washington, D.C. Certainly a breath of fresh air, and a champion for, again, truth and transparency for our government and for our institutions. So with that said, I'd like to offer a quick round of applause for them. Secondly, I'd like to thank the esteemed panelists that are with us here today. Can you all hear me okay in the back? Okay, I can adjust your mic, or I can use my drill sergeant voice if I need to. We're going to have three separate sections with panelists with extremely esteemed backgrounds. I'm not sure there's ever been assembled a panel like this in front of the American people. And I don't say that lightly because I've been part of a lot of meetings, a lot of sensitive meetings, both in the intelligence community and within the national security apparatus. We have elements from academia, elements from the scientific community, elements from the national security arena, elements from the intelligence community, all speaking here today to you about what they know regarding the UAP topic. The assembly here is, dare I say, possibly even historic. And I'm truly honored to be with you here today. I will be your moderator. Real quick reminder for our panelists, I'd like to, when you ask a question, try to keep it within 3 minutes, Eric. If you go beyond that, I might have to kind of get the conversation directed to some other questions because we do have a lot of panelists. And I also have a tendency to talk a lot, so I'm going to try to keep myself in check as well. But panelists, if you can try to keep your responses to 3 minutes. Some panelists have for you a presentation. So for those who have a presentation, we'll do the presentation first, and then we'll be followed up with questions. And of course, esteemed members of Congress, if you have any questions at the time, please feel free to ask them, and we will certainly have our panelists address those questions for you. One more reminder. Again, a security reminder, I know I said it before, but for everybody who's coming here after, I'm going to be asking questions. Some of those will be very pointed questions. For those of you who have a security clearance or who have held a security clearance, I ask that you please be mindful that this is an unclassified venue and not to discuss classified information. For the record, none of us look good in an orange jumpsuit. Certainly I don't. So we want to be mindful of that. I'd also like to thank the media. Thank each and every one of you for being here. I know this is a topic that for quite some time was fraught with stigma and taboo. This would have been considered career suicide for any respectable journalist to cover this topic, just like it is for politicians and our elected leaders of this nation. And times are changing. Times are changing because of you. And so I want to do a hearty thank you to the members of media who are covering this. And last but not least, and probably perhaps most important, I would like to thank each and every one of you in the audience. Each and every one of you that's tuning in, each and every one of you that's watching this, each and every one of you that might be sitting on your sofa at home or around a dinner table and are interested in this topic and have asked questions. This is because of you. Our elected officials put this on because of you, not me, and not even our esteemed guests, because of you. And that should tell you something. That means democracy is working, folks. That means transparency is working. That means we, the people, are winning. And that's a lot. That's profound. This is democracy in action, and you're watching it. So I want to thank each and every one of you, and I also want to thank real quick the staff here on Hill that helped put this together and coordinate this. I know it's a bit of a zoo, but thank you so much for being patient with us and helping us with the audio visual and the media and the seating, and it is very much appreciated. So with that, let's go ahead and begin, shall we? So I'd like to introduce the first of our panelists here is Dr. Avi Loeb. Now bear with me because he has his academic vitae. It's probably about 10 pages long, so I'm going to just try to truncate a little bit. So Dr. Avi Loeb is a PhD professor of science at Harvard University. He is also the head of the Galileo Project. He is also the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative. He is a contributor to Arrow. He is also a trained astrophysicist. Let's see if we can get this right. Director of the what institute? Director of the Institute for Theory and Computation, and a former member of the President's Council on Science and Technology. So think about that for a minute, right? Advising the President. Former chair of the Board of Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies, and also author of 8 books and over 1,000 scientific papers. And he's here before you today. By the way, none of our panelists are being paid. Everybody's doing this out of their own kindness and goodness of their own heart. The second panelist we have here is Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. For those of you who served in the Navy know how hard it is to achieve the rank of Admiral. Right? That is no easy feat. He's also a former acting administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, aka NOAA. Former oceanographer for the Navy, a advisory board member of the UAPDF, folks here that are helping make this happen. But I'll tell you something else about Tim. Tim also happened to be one of the Navy officers that was present and privy during the Roosevelt incidences. The Roosevelt, the reason why I say plural, because there were many of these UAP incidents that the USS Roosevelt encountered in the 2013-2014 timeframe when she was conducting military operations in the support of the global war on terror. And so Admiral Gallaudet, I would consider indirectly a witness to some degree of some of the dysfunction that the bureaucracy had overlaid on some of our servicemen and women in uniform reporting UAP. And certainly last but not least is Dr. Eric Davis, not only a colleague but a friend, and in some cases even a mentor. He is a theoretical and applied physicist, senior science advisor at EarthTech, former researcher at the Aerospace Corporation, and now those are just some of those. Let me tell you who he really is. Dr. Eric Davis was one of our senior scientists during my tenure at ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and OSAP as well. He was one of our chief scientists, and by the way, he was also part of other legacy efforts before that, working with elements of the US government, and I think what you're going to find him have to say today is going to be very, very compelling. He's an honorable man. He has served his country time and time again, in some cases at great personal expense, professionally and personally to himself. And probably one of the smartest individuals I've ever had the honor and privilege to meet in my life and work with. if you get a chance, I'd shake his hand, because I would consider him, like the rest of these gentlemen, a national treasure. And I think, like I said, what he's going to tell you today is going to be very interesting. And so this is why I do the reminder of 3 minutes, because even myself, I would love to just let him roll for about 3 hours. So with that said, I think we have a presentation we're going to present first by Dr. Abby Loeb. So if we could just give him a quick round of applause.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let us be honest. There are objects in the sky that we don't understand. That's not the first time that we don't understand something. You know, our knowledge, scientific knowledge, is an island in an ocean of ignorance. We don't know what 85% of matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter, but we invest billions of dollars figuring it out over the past half century. We haven't yet figured it out. My point is simple. We should invest $1 billion in figuring out what is in our sky. And that means developing artificial intelligence algorithms, software, that would help us analyze data from state-of-the-art sensors. And in one case, if all of these objects are produced by humans, the Defense Department will have a new tool to monitor what's out there in the sky. It's important for national security. However, if 1 out of 1 million objects came from outside the solar system, the person who finds that object will get the Nobel Prize. It's a win-win situation. We need to invest $1 billion in this task. And I will mention a few details of what we can do with it. This is a subject that the public cares a lot about. And so it's one of the unusual opportunities to invest $1 billion in science and technology that will make all taxpayers happy. If you were to ask them, do they care more about what dark matter is, or whether we have a neighbor that is intelligent from which we can learn, they will tell you it's the second question that they want the $1 billion to be spent on. So to make taxpayers happy, let's invest the money. And if we don't find any technological relics from other civilizations, this would be a very precious defense system for our country. So I will show a few slides describing what we have been doing over the past few years in the project that I'm leading at Harvard University, the Galileo project. What you see in the first slide is a title of an article that appeared in New York Times Magazine. And I was not happy with the content. I contacted the editor and said, if this is the way you describe science, how can I believe anything you say about politics?
That's a good take.
We can leave now, you've already covered.
Now, Enrico Fermi, in 1950, had lunch at Los Alamos, and in his Italian accent, he asked, where is everybody? And that's a question that every lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, don't be presumptuous. Your partner will not come to you. You are not that attractive. You have to go to dating sites. And Enrico Fermi didn't even build a telescope to look out, didn't have cameras to check. And so saying, where is everybody, is arrogant. And many of my colleagues in academia argue, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you read the news, you would conclude that we are not extraordinary, there is room for improvement. And imagining something like us on a planet that has similar conditions to Earth is not an extraordinary claim. It's just an ordinary claim to say under similar circumstances you will get life and eventually intelligent life. And most stars in the Milky Way galaxy, 100 billion of them, formed billions of years before the sun. So we are late for the party. They may have been before us. So it's an ordinary claim that requires ordinary evidence. When people make this statement, they also imply that we should not invest any funds in searching for them. And without seeking evidence, how can we find them? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my point is that within the scientific community, innovation is suppressed by people who assume the answer in advance. When I was a kid, I was most frustrated by the adults in the room because I would ask them a question and they would pretend to know the answer. And the one reason I became a scientist is because I don't care what other people say. I don't care how many likes I get. I just want to figure out the answer based on evidence. That's the way a detective works. We shouldn't assume anything. But if we don't collect data, we will never find anything new. Now, another important point is new scientific knowledge doesn't fall into our lap. To find the Higgs boson, the CERN invested $10 billion in the Large Hadron Collider. To find the first generation of stars and galaxies in the universe, the scientific version of the story, the biblical story of Genesis, we had to invest $10 billion in the Webb telescope. I was one of the people in the first advisory committee, the design, back then the next generation space telescope. My point is, in order to find something new, you need to invest resources, time, and effort. It's a lot of work. You can't just sit on your chair and figure out the answer the way most people do. And just to give you an example, we are familiar with objects that have a positive mass. We are also aware that the universe is not just expanding, but its expansion is accelerating. So we see evidence for negative gravity that is repulsive, pushing the universe apart. And if we have access to a negative mass, just like there are positive and negative electric charges, if you put a negative mass next to a positive mass, the total mass would be zero. This object would float under gravity. And you won't need any fuel to move it around. So when they look at Starship, our best rocket, whoever has an access to a negative mass would laugh at it. We are putting most of the mass in the fuel of the rocket. It's a huge, gigantic thing. And if they had access to a negative mass, that would not be necessary. You would just use the payload plus a negative mass that balances it. Just to give an example of something beyond our knowledge, if negative masses exist or not, we don't know if you can bottle this dark energy that fills up the universe. Thank you. Now, the Galileo project at Harvard University was established a few years ago, and it followed the first report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to Congress. And I suggested also to NASA, just around that time, that they should look into that. This is a subject where the intelligence agency cannot really make a lot of progress on because the data is limited. So why not build observatories monitoring the sky? The sky is not classified. Astronomers have been looking at the sky for a while. The oceans are not classified. We just need sensors and then analyzing the data with the state-of-the-art AI software. That's all we need. So this was not happening. And I'm not happy with looking at past reports, because when you look at past reports, you have very limited data. And you can't make a lot of progress. If the data is fuzzy, you can't really get it to be crispier. But if you have a working observatory that monitors the sky all the time, all the oceans, and you see something unusual, you can try and collect better data. And therefore, I always say, the best is yet to come. If we were curious enough, and that's what we should be, we can collect data, forget about the hundreds of reports from the past, and have a collection of millions of objects that we look at. That's what the Galileo project is about. And in the future, we can get very good data with equipment that was never tried before, because astronomers usually focus on a small part of the sky and look at things that are far away. They ignore objects flying overhead. And the Galileo project has developed an observatory at Harvard University first that monitors the sky in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio. And as of now, we are actually doing triangulation. We have multiple units that look at the same object from different directions so that we can figure out the distance, the velocity, the acceleration of the object. That's extremely important. And we are building additional observatories, one in Pennsylvania, another one in Nevada. Hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have 3 observatories collecting data on a few million objects every year. And I say, even if 1 in a million is of extraterrestrial origin, that would be the biggest discovery that humanity ever made. It would mean that we have a partner. We shouldn't assume anything about the neighbor. But it would be useful to figure out what they are capable of, because we can do better. They're probably more advanced than we are if they reached our backyard before we reached their backyard. So we collected data on many, by now, millions of objects. We analyzed it. And obviously, we are happy to share the data with whoever is interested. But also, over the past decade, the first objects from outside the solar system were discovered for the first time by astronomers. There were 3 of them. The first was identified by US government satellites that are monitoring the Earth for any ballistic missiles being launched by adversarial nations. And in 2014, they noticed an object that collided with Earth and exploded with a fireball that released 1% of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. And they decided it's not human-made, and therefore it can be shared with the astronomy community. So NASA published a catalog of all these meteors over the past decade, and one of them was this one. We looked at the catalog and uncovered it and realized that it came from outside the solar system because it was moving very fast. It was moving faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun outside the solar system. And so the question is, was it a Voyager-like probe, because it's moving so fast, or maybe just a rock from another star? That was the first one. And then the second one in 2017 was a much bigger object. The first one was 0.5 meter in size. The second one was the size of a football field. It didn't collide with Earth. It would have been catastrophic if it did, because it would have killed us all. But it passed near Earth, within 1/6 of the Earth-Sun separation. It was observed by a telescope in Hawaii, monitoring near-Earth objects, because we are all afraid of what happened to the dinosaurs, right? We don't want to have the same fate. And they realized this object is moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun. And they called it Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. Now, this object at first was thought to be a comet, but there was no cometary tail around it, no gas or dust. And then it exhibited an excess push away from the sun without any rocket effect of acting on it. And moreover, it had a very extreme shape, most likely flat, like a disk, based on the reflection of sunlight. The amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10 every 8 hours as it was tumbling. Very unusual object. So it wasn't clear. It's not an asteroid. It's not a comet. What is it? And I suggested, well, maybe it's space trash, an empty trash bag from another civilization. So that was 2017. And then, oops. And then there was, oops, I'm not sure. Okay, then there was a comet, which looked just like the comets that we are familiar with in 2019, also came from outside the solar system based on its speed. And my colleagues said, well, this one looks familiar, so doesn't it convince you that the others are also natural? And I said, well, if you go down the street and you see a weird person, and after that you see a normal person, it doesn't make the weird person normal. So, Oumuamua was really strange, most likely flat, and it's not clear what it was. I suggested maybe it's a very thin object pushed by sunlight, reflecting sunlight. And in fact, a lot of technological debris that we produce is being pushed by reflecting sunlight. In fact, I'm not sure, but okay. In fact, the space trash that we produce, on January 2nd, 2025, just this year, an amateur astronomer noticed an object passing near Earth, and it was cataloged as a near-Earth asteroid. 17 hours later, it was realized, oh, this object moves exactly the same way as the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX in 2018, Elon Musk. It is a car. It's not an asteroid. They removed it from the catalog. And I actually have a bet with Elon. I am willing to put 1% of my net worth against 1% of his net worth to search, to check if there is any other space entrepreneur who is more accomplished than he is since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. Let's figure it out. It's not a lot of money for him. And then, actually in 2020, there was the same telescope in Hawaii that discovered the Oumuamua, discovered another object that was pushed by reflecting sunlight, and then after a few weeks, the astronomers realized, oh, that's a rocket booster from a 1966 launch by NASA. So we know that some of the objects that are unusual, being pushed by sunlight, are human-made. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? And my point is that the next Copernican revolution, remember, Copernicus realized we are not the physical center of the universe. I actually visited Poland a year ago, a day after visiting the Munich Security Conference, where I spoke as the first astrophysicist that ever, by the way, I saw on the roof of the hotel at the Munich Security Conference, there were snipers with black head covers. They were there to protect the politicians. I realized being an astrophysicist is really very fortunate, but nobody wants to kill me. But at any event,
It's overrated.
the next Copernican revolution is that we are not at the technological center of the universe. We have something to learn from a smarter kid on our cosmic block. And I wrote a paper a couple of months ago where I explained that with a space telescope, we can actually go through the million objects, roughly meter in size, within the orbit of the Earth around the Sun that came from outside the solar system, and figure out whether among them, among all the rocks, there is space trash from other civilizations, because over the past billions of years, they predated us and they polluted interstellar space because we sent out 5 probes, Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, and New Horizons. They are heading out of the solar system towards interstellar space. We did it over 50 years. Just think how many more we would produce in the next billion years. And all of that keeps accumulating like plastics in the ocean. All of this trash produced by other civilizations. And we just have to look in our backyard and figure it out. Again, $1 billion will go a long way in this direction. But right now, this subject is outside the mainstream. of astronomy. Instead, the highest priority defined by the Decadal Survey is to spend more than $10 billion in the search for microbes, for the molecular fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets. And frankly, I'm much more excited about finding intelligence than finding microbes, for a simple reason, that we can learn from a higher level of intelligence. One reason I seek intelligence in interstellar space is because I don't often find it here on Earth. And you may ask, where will Voyager be in 1 billion years? It will be on the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy. So if most stars formed billions of years before the sun, we know that for a fact, they had, if there were civilizations like us out there, they had plenty of time for their spacecraft to reach us. And we haven't really checked. Until the last decade, we didn't really know about interstellar objects. So I'm saying this is new. Now, the meteor, the object that collided with Earth, was interesting because for a cost of $1.5 million that I received from a donor, we were able to go to the Pacific Ocean and search for materials left over from this interstellar object. It exploded only 20 kilometers above the surface of the ocean, and that implied that it had material strength tougher than all other hundreds of meteors in the NASA catalog. So it was unusual in its material strength, in its speed, and the question was, could it be a Voyager-like meteor? Could it be a Tesla Roadster car-like meteor? Because that car actually will collide with Earth probably in several tens of millions of years. And my colleagues, if there are any astronomers at that time, they might argue it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. So actually the US Space Command looked back at the data after I reached them through the White House, and they confirmed, yes, this meteor actually came from outside the solar system. The data was reliable, and they also released the light curve of the explosion that indicated how much energy was released and at what altitude was the explosion. And so I decided to lead an expedition to the Pacific Ocean. We went there slightly less than 2 years ago. And what you see here is the deck of the ship that was fittingly called Silver Star. We built a sled with magnets on both sides, and we placed it on the ocean floor, which was 1 mile deep. And we surveyed a region that is 7 miles in size, looking for any molten droplets left over from the explosion, just to figure out, was it a natural rock or maybe a gadget? And I told my students before I left, if we find a gadget and it has buttons on it, should I press a button? The opinions were split. Half of the class said, please don't do that. You put all of us at risk. And the other half said, please do. We would like to see if it's ChatGPT 100. So we brought back materials, and it was a 2-week expedition. I put all the materials in this black suitcase and shipped it by FedEx to my home, and then brought it to the laboratory of my colleague at Harvard, Stein Jacobson, who is a world-renowned geochemist that has the best instruments in the world. And on the other side of me in this photo is a summer intern, Sophie Bergstrom, who worked with me that summer, and she discovered 850 molten droplets within the materials that we brought back. And I gave her the honorary title, the Sphero Hunter. And you can see here what these molten droplets looked like. They were very distinct relative to the background sand, and we picked them up with tweezers and published the results. And so there was one type of those molten droplets, about 10% of the entire reservoir, that looked very unusual. they had a composition, a chemical composition that was very different than solar system materials. Up to 1,000 times higher abundance of beryllium, lanthanum, uranium than you find in solar system materials. And so that's a possible indication that we found some material from the original object, but we want to go back and search for bigger pieces with a robot that we will put on the ocean floor. It will cost $6.5 million. We don't have a funder as of yet. If anyone is interested in joining us, let me know. This is an image from the last day of the previous expedition where I was standing on the ship looking at the sunset, and next to me is an 88 years old Art Wright, who was commander of a destroyer during the Vietnam War. And I really liked him because he wouldn't speak much. He would solve problems. And everything he said was true. And there aren't many people like that these days. What you find most often are people that are virtue signaling, that are trying to impress you. That's partly the culture of social media. But this mission was a success thanks to art. And he reminded me of my father. I really liked him. Now, this year, in August 2025, there is a new observatory in Chile that was funded by the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation. It's called the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, and it will survey the southern sky every 4 nights and could find Oumuamua-like objects every few months if they are out there. And now we know to look at them in much greater detail. We can use the Webb telescope to do that. And this telescope will use a camera that is 3.2 gigapixels in resolution, so 1,000 times more than the number of resolution elements you have in your cell phone. So I'm very excited about the coming year or two. We will have new results from the observatories that the Galileo project is building. We will have potentially a new expedition where we can look for bigger pieces of this first interstellar meteor, and the Rubin Observatory might find more Oumuamua-like objects. But if we really want to make fast progress, we need more funds. If I had $100 million or $1 billion, I know exactly what needs to be done, and we can get much better understanding of our cosmic neighborhood. As I said before, the software that we developed would be of great use to the Department of Defense. Thank you.
Followed very quickly by Admiral Gaudet. He'd like to say a couple words, and we're going to try to make this brief so we can go ahead and start getting to some of the questions. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and Representatives Luna and Burleson and Burchett. Appreciate you giving us all an opportunity to share what we want to share and say what we want to say about this important topic of UAP. So I'll be about 5 minutes here, maybe a little less, but today I call on the American scientific enterprise to mainstream UAP research and development. And to do that properly, I should first begin by assessing the current state of UAP research. There are a few brave individuals and organizations conducting such research, including Professor Avi Loeb through the Galileo Project at Harvard, Professor Diana Pasulka at UNCW, Drs. Gary Nolan and Peter Skafish at the Sol Foundation with Stanford University, Professor Jeffrey Kripal with the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, and the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. But these are by far the exception. For UAP research and scientific study is shunned by the American science community writ large. Even with dozens of credible former military witnesses coming forward, as well as legislative action from Congress in recent years, the stigma remains too great to jeopardize the reputation, promotion potential, and tenure of those in academia. To better understand this resistance, it might be useful for me to describe the state of climate science in this country, where the complete opposite is occurring. As a former administrator of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration with a PhD in oceanography, I have studied the changes occurring in our Earth system, and while they are indeed significant, and I am by no means a climate denier, climate change is far from the existential threat that the mainstream media and some in the science community claim it to be. A false narrative has been propagated that global warming caused by anthropogenic greenhouse gases is the cause of every severe weather event on any given day. This is mainly the result of a large number of scientific studies that employ extreme and implausible emission scenarios. Lacking the expertise to critically evaluate such studies, the average citizen has readily accepted such misinformation. Conflating every extreme weather event with climate change is imprecise, incomplete, and incorrect. The most glaring examples come around every hurricane season, for which satellite data over the 50 years shows there's been no trend upward or downward of these storms. The same goes for wildfires, where news coverage always links climate change to their occurrence, but wildfires have actually been increasing in this country. So even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been unable to conclusively detect changes in extreme weather and climate event frequency and intensity. However, saying that we are not in fact in a climate crisis is heresy to the mainstream media and the global science community. This is the situation with UAP, but in reverse. Ample evidence, even congressional testimony, attests to the scientific validity of UAP. But the response by members of the scientific community has been either A, to bury their heads in the sand, or B, to make faceless mockery of the courageous contrarians like Professor Lowe who seek the truth. Why is this so? Well, the reason is partially due to overclassification and a deliberate, decades-long disinformation campaign by the U.S. Department of Defense and intelligence community. Unlike climate change, UAP and the non-human intelligence which control them very well could be an existential threat, as our moderator, Lou Elizondo, eloquently described in his book, aptly named Imminent. The scientific community needs to wake up to the reality of UAP, which represents the most monumental development since the Copernican Revolution. Consider the extraordinary report I received this weekend when a former U.S. Navy SH-60 Seahawk helicopter crew chief who was embarked on the carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower in 2021 described to me his recording on forward-looking infrared video of a metallic sphere at an altitude a few hundred feet above the ship traveling along a linear trajectory horizontal to sea surface before it accelerated into the horizon at an incredible speed, disappearing completely. Upon landing, he discussed this with some of the pilots and the other air crew before transferring the FLIR footage to the carrier's intelligence officer. Moreover, this was not an isolated event. For the Eisenhower Strike Group, during that deployment, saw many instances of UAP, primarily F-18s, frequently encountering them at high altitude. And this topic was widely discussed by the Air Wing during the entire deployment. And later, fellow aircrew members of this crew chief from another squadron deployed on board the USS Gerald R. Ford and shared similar experiences. The crew chief also informed me that the secret laptops in their ready room provided access to a shared drive where numerous UAP sightings on FLIR were archived. They stored these videos on a folder named Range Fowlers. If you'd like that, Ryan. And his commanding officer and safety officer were aware of these incidents, but there was an unspoken understanding not to discuss them openly in the ready room. I have spoken to other sailors still in active duty, and their sightings of UAP have become so numerous that they are desensitized to the phenomenon. My point being that the Navy possesses a trove of video evidence and data regarding UAP, and I see no reason why FLIR footage of UAP at Navy training ranges could not be declassified and shared with the scientific community. With open access to more data like this, we could transform every institution of higher education by establishing a Galileo project within their astronomy and astrophysics departments, a Soul Foundation within their biomedicine and humanities programs, and an archive of the impossible in their religious studies and philosophy curricula. To close, I point out that last month at the Endless Frontiers Conference in Austin, the President's Science Advisor, Michael Kratsios, committed the Trump administration to creating a golden age in American innovation. I am convinced that UAP research can not only support this, but accelerate it in ways beyond our imagination. The time to destroy the stigma associated with UAP is now. I ask the House Oversight Committee and other members of Congress to demand the DoD, DOE, DHS, and NASA release more UAP data for open science. And I call on the White House to include UAP research in its 2025 R&D priorities memo. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I will. So, we're going to get to our first question here, and it is not scripted, and it is to my former colleague, Dr. Eric Davis. I'm going to be very careful how I ask this specific question. Welcome, Mr. Gold. Good to see you, as always.
Sorry,
No, it's okay. Dr. Davis, I know your background and I know your work in our former program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. I also know to some degree some of the history and first-hand experience you have on UAP. I believe that this committee and the esteemed members of Congress and the American public would love to hear, to the degree you're able to discuss it, the direct access you had. For those who don't know, Dr. Davis was, and I'll let him answer this, it was submitted into the matter of record for Congress a couple years ago, the Wilson Davis memo. It was alleged that he was the author of it. And if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up. It has been entered as a matter of public record in the Congressional record, and it is extremely significant. This is the man, I won't say he did or he didn't, I'll let him tell you, who authored that potentially. And furthermore, I know has had involvement in the UAP program, specifically from a crash retrieval perspective. Now, I'm going to be mindful here. Dr. Davis, please be careful of security classification, but do you mind sharing, to the degree you're comfortable with, your involvement with information relating to crash retrievals and your experience?
Sure.
No, good.
Thank you. I'm an astrophysicist and also what Mark Jones at NASA and I call the breakthrough propulsion physicist. Worked on breakthrough propulsion together from 1996 to 2002, and then we continued after that to develop a book that we published with the AIAA Press in 2009, Frontiers of Propulsion Science. So my background is in advanced deep space and interstellar space flight, mostly faster than light propulsion through the use of general relativity theory and quantum field theory, as well as advanced nuclear propulsion like nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. And beamed energy propulsion, which I worked on as a principal investigator for the Air Force Research Lab at Edwards Air Force Base. So I've got quite a broad background. And I began my work in UFOs, or UAP, starting in 1996 when Robert Bigelow hired me to work for him as his director of aerospace physics and astrophysics at the National Institute for Discovery Science. And that was a pretty transformative job for me because as a physical scientist, I'm seeing for the first time odd phenomena. I'm investigating it using forensic science techniques in the field, interviewing witnesses, collecting data. And I have a team of colleagues on the staff that I work with, also PhDs. And we have a world-class science advisory board, which my former boss in Austin, Hal Putoff, was on the board of directors, was on that science advisory board and was the last chairman of that board, actually. We also had Apollo 14 astronaut Ed Mitchell, and for a short time Apollo 17 astronaut Jack Schmidt, and we had many academicians and former CIA, national intelligence officers, social psychologists, medical doctors, and nuclear engineers, and the list goes on. We had shock ballooning primarily as well. So it was a really transformative because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I became familiar with Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan and Strong Report and Page co-authored a book called UFOs, A Scientific Debate, which was published by the AAAS Press. The AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and science is their prestigious journal that they publish. And so that was a prestigious publication. Every chapter was authored by experts in the field in academia who have studied UFOs and some angle of it from a scientific data standpoint. Data that was collected, data that was analyzed. And so they presented it and published the book. For a bizarre reason, in the 1980s, Carl Sagan had this wonderful astronomy show called Cosmos, and the companion book for that. And what's ironic is that he changed 180 degrees. He all of a sudden went from being UFOs, we have in this book that I co-authored or co-edited with Dorothy Page, all of this wonderful data that's been collected that is not explainable due to conventional astronomical, weather, or man-made explanations or events or objects. I'm now calling it pseudoscience. It's fringe science. People are mistaken. Pilots have poor vision. Military pilots especially, and I heard that from Leonard David, who's a aerospace engineering, aviation, space exploration writer, and people like him have said that our military pilots, especially the ones at the USS Nimitz, during its encounter of the Tic Tac UAP back in November of 2004, oh yes, those pilots have poor vision. They're flying, what, $20 million fighter aircraft? And they have poor vision. How did they get through the Naval Aviation Program and Top Gun School with poor vision?
Dr. Davis, could you elaborate a little bit on your, again, to the degree that you're comfortable?
Oh, I know what you're going with. So it was a transformative issue for me, or a job. It transformed my worldview. It opened up my worldview to a lot more possibilities than what I was used to thinking. As a trained PhD physicist, I earned my doctorate in astrophysics at the University of Arizona in '91. And so I worked on 3 space missions in graduate school. The IRAS, which is the Infrared Astronomical Satellite Program, and the 2 Voyager missions to the outer planets. So as pertaining to the topic that Lou wants me to talk about, I'm not trying to avoid it. It is a sensitive subject. It's due to astronaut Ed Mitchell, Dr. Ed Mitchell, Captain USN retired. Because of him, and I won't go into a long story, but it's because of him that I got on the trail of looking for the so-called legend within the UFO community. The retrieval of crashed or landed UAP craft, or UFO craft as they were known back in those days. And by the way, UAP, the term unidentified aerial phenomenon, goes back to the 1940s even. So I followed this trail, and I ended up, over the course of the following 2.5 decades, working for Bigelow, working for the Air Force Research Lab, working for Hal Puthoff at Urtech International Incorporated, and then working at the Aerospace Corporation. So we're working in a combination of industry and classified programs that we were contracted to do on behalf of for the Defense Intelligence Agency and for the Pentagon agencies that Lou worked at, and the UAP task force that Jay Stratton led at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And so, a long story short is that I came into contact with industry leaders, technical scientists, both active duty and later retired, as well as intelligence officers, generals, admirals, colonels, people who directed intelligence or human intelligence collection and analysis directorates at the DIA and the Central Intelligence Agency, who reached out to me to have me do some foreign UAP intelligence analysis and assessment. And so I had been exposed to so much in the classified realm that I can tell you definitively that there is a there. The human race, basically the world's biggest governments, like the United States, our adversary China and Russia, at least as far as I know, have had the occasion to recover craft that have either landed or crashed or both in their territory or even outside of their territories, and have taken those back to the most sensitive of their programs that they've ever had. These programs are even more sensitive and more well hidden than the Manhattan Project was, or the modern nuclear weapons industry and the U.S. military and the Department of Energy programs to maintain and upgrade and modernize our nuclear weapons arsenal. And so this is one of the most well hidden programs. It is hidden from Congressional Oversight, and always has been. And it was hidden by the action of President Eisenhower, who instituted presidential emergency action directives during his administration. These directives are not shared with Congress. They are classified. And when the Freedom of Information Act was instituted in the 70s, those are not subjected to the Freedom of Information Act request. These directives provide cover for actions that are associated with the with the retrieval of these vehicles and the scientific and engineering study of them. And that takes place within the industry. What happens is the Department of Defense offices, CIA offices, they create shell companies. They give a sole source contract to the shell company who passes the money to a selected group of defense industry firms. And those firms will take that contract money and turn them around and use that as internal funding. It's called internal research and development funds, which they give to their own people inside their company, their own employees, to do the reverse engineering and analysis and study of these recovered vehicles. And so this avoids all congressional oversight. It avoids the game of 8. And it's one of the most clever techniques used to hide it. And as far as I know, only one 4-star general and one 3-star admiral were able to locate these programs. And that's about as much as I can say. They located the programs and they uncovered them. One got a lot of resistance and hostile reception and was told that he found who he was looking for. They were who they were suspected of being. Yes, they were a UFO, UAP, crash retrieval, and reverse engineering program. The other one had a lot more political power behind him because of his stature as a 4-star general. And he was able to get into the program and use his authority and his access. I think they call that a super user. The super user has access to all special access programs. So he had his capability to be able to get into that whole thing. I was fortunate to meet Dave Dresch at the behest of Jay Stratton. Dave was a NRO liaison officer to the UAP task force, and Dave was working for his boss at the NRO, which was situated in the second floor skiffs of the Aerospace Corporation building in Colorado Springs. And I was assigned to work at the Aerospace Corporation facility in Huntsville, Alabama, because I was supporting NASA's Space Nuclear Propulsion Program office. So Jay put Dave and Dave's boss and I together, and I briefed them for 2.5 days, just a week before COVID struck. And Dave took all of my classified and proprietary information of all the investigations I did at NIDS, AFRO, and working for helping up at ERTEC, and he took that data and ran with it. And what you now know, the aftermath of that was his classified whistleblower complaint to the IG of the IC. And so there is a there. We have had this program going on in various guises, various code names. Code names change roughly every 3 years. They often shift around due to major office and programmatic reorganizations from presidential administration to presidential administration, or maybe every 5 to 10 years in some cases. And so these things are very old. They come in, they've gone, but they're still around. And the amount of money that's been involved, I would say since the beginning in 1944 with the first recovery in Italy, of the U.S. Army's recovery of a craft that crashed in Italy back in 1933. The United States Army, when it invaded Italy and pushed the Third Reich out, they were able to recover that craft and bring it back to Wright Airfield. And all of the crash retrievals that have taken place generally on land have gone to Wright Airfield. The majority of the crash retrievals or recoveries of whatever situation it was take place in the maritime environment. And I'm not sure where that is going. I think they're probably also going to were in those days Wright Airfield. I don't know where they're going today though, because I've only worked on the legacy history of this part of it up until about the early 2010s. And ever since the end of the OSAP and the ATIP, I don't know where those operations are going on these days. So I think that's about it.
Is that it?
If there is a question I would always ask, and I'll just say this really easily. Leslie King and Ralph Blumenthal asked me this for an interview I gave them in July of 2020 for the New York Times article that they published. They interviewed Lou and former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I think Harry was already retired then, wasn't he? Yeah. Okay, so I said basically my interface with the leadership at the industry, which were a number of individuals, is the following. The craft that have been recovered are not of this earth. They're not made by human hands. They are not from this planet. They are not human. They are an alien technology, whatever the word alien means. Are they extraterrestrial? We don't know. We don't know. What motives do they have? Well, we need anthropologists and social psychologists and philosophers to figure that out because they haven't communicated that to us. So physicists like me and Avi, we cannot answer questions like motive. We just need to take data. We call it measurements and signals intelligence in the intelligence industry. And Avi, I support 1,000% because we need him to do what he needs to do. UAPX is another group from the University of Albany in Albany, New York. They're doing that as well. And there are other groups out there building up their own sensor speeds to try to scan the sky full-time, 24/7, to look for something that's high, and definitely not weather, definitely not an aircraft, and definitely not a kid's little quadcopter.
Well, thank you, Dr. Davis. My recommendation would be at some point here to get you in a classified setting like some of the rest of us, and you've already done that before, and have a frank conversation with some of the representatives who I think would be very interested to hear the other part of that conversation, which I am aware of and been part of. With that said, before we go on, I wanted to thank real quick Rep. Nick Begich for, how do you pronounce your name, sir? I apologize. Begich, okay, forgive me. Begich. Rep. Nick Begich, who arrived here just not too long ago, so thank you, sir, very much. From Alabama? Rep. from Alabama? Oh, Alaska.
He's like the hub.
Sir, my humble apologies. Obviously, I'm remembering my dyslexia instead of whoever wrote this for me. Thank you, sir, for being here, and also great seeing you yesterday. As far as the next question, what I'd like to do is direct this to Admiral Gallaudet. Sir, only about 50% of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution. In fact, some have stipulated that we know even more about the surface of our own moon than the depths of our own oceans. What concrete mapping campaigns, autonomous gliders, deep sea sonars, or cabled observatories would give researchers the best chance of detecting undersea UAP activity? Up to this point, we've been discussing about the stuff we see in our skies and possibly space. But the one thing we've neglected are those observations of UAP that are underwater. And this kind of goes to the whole transmedium characteristic that we're seeing, that some of these UAP can display, particularly as a former Navy man and member of NOAA. What advice could you offer there?
Thanks, Lou. That's a great question. And in fact, I would advise us to continue what we started in Trump's first administration. And what we did is we got him to sign a presidential memorandum on mapping the U.S. exclusive economic zone. And that directed the establishment of a strategy, a plan, a national strategy, a plan, and a council, an interagency council, to contribute to the effort. And so we did this in 2020, and in the 5 years since, we've been able to go from having 40% of our EEZ mapped to 50%. And it involves not only using ships with sonar, but also exploring the water column with deep diving remotely operated vehicles, swarms of drones, underwater drones. I used to own 120 in the Navy, and that fleet's grown. And NOAA has a pretty sizable fleet of underwater and surface drones, and they partner with the private sector that has a vast capability as well. So I'd say we really want to expand the work that's already occurring within the government and the private sector, and target it, because most of it is targeted towards ocean science, and that's great. But if we open the aperture a bit and include UAP as a research target, I think we'll learn a lot more about the phenomena as well as the ocean.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is geared towards Dr. Avilov here, and my question for you, sir, is what is your recommendation for the new generation of scientists who want to enter into this field of study but don't know exactly where to begin?
Yes, I actually gave up on the senior members of our community, and I have great hope that the young generation will approach it without any bias, because science is all about evidence and curiosity. And we lose that when we become the adults in the room. So for the young people, in fact, I was asked to establish a Galileo Observatory in a new stem cell campus that will be built in Indiana. And I'm very excited about that, because those high school students and fledgling scientists would be unbiased, they would look at the data and try to figure it out. That's the way science should be done. And very often, if you assume something, if you say, there is nothing out there, and you are not looking, then obviously that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I very much hope that the young generation will approach this subject without any stigma, without any prejudice, without any bias, because it's of great interest to national security, and even if it has nothing to do with what lies outside the solar system, we need to figure it out. Maybe other nations have technologies that we are not aware of. And if we do find something from outside the solar system, it's the biggest discovery ever made in science. It will change our perception and our place in the universe. I had a group of religious people that came and they belong to Christianity Today, an organization, and they asked me, what would be the implications to religion? And I said, well, I have 2 daughters, and when the second one was born, I didn't lose any of my love to the first one. So imagining that God can only attend to one civilization is very limited. And I think, in fact, it would be enriching to realize that we have siblings. We might be jealous if they're more advanced than we are. Maybe they get more attention. But, that's exciting. We may get inspiration from finding something better than us. So why is it that academia, the mainstream, is shying away from this? Partly because the public cares so much about it. And, there are lots of statements that are not correct, that being made by people who have no evidence, but that should not be a reason to avoid this subject. We should study it, and young people, I think, have the ability to figure it out. If we have the resources allocated to the research, we'll figure it out. We have the equipment. It's much more exciting than figuring out what dark matter is, whether there are microbes on exoplanets, which probably exist in any warm water environment similar to Earth. I'm willing to bet that there are microbes, but I don't care much about them. I really want to find things that are better than us, so that we can get better, we can improve ourselves. And the young generation hopefully will do it for us if we only allocate the resources, if we don't block them, because the gatekeepers, use this technique of not funding such research, ridiculing it, and even when I went on the expedition, people said, oh, he will not find anything. Oh, he went to the wrong place. We don't believe the US government data from the US Space Command. And my suggestion is just to ignore the naysayers, because they are boring.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Little. I'm going to make this very quick. I know one of the representatives is very short on time. There's a question I'm going to ask in her presence. The question goes to Dr. Davis. We've had discussions at length in certain settings, in formal official settings that I've been part of, where we talk about exotic material. I think it might be very helpful to the degree you can. Can you please explain what makes exotic material that has been recovered from the U.S. government exotic? What makes it different from atomically and chemically?
It's actually a very simple answer. It's the way it's fabricated. It's the way it's fabricated. That's what makes it exotic. It's not a new element that's never been discovered and placed on the periodic table of elements. No. The materials are in the periodic tables. They're either radioactive isotopes that we already know of, or they're any of the other non-radioactive, non-actinide elements on the table. It's just the combination of the materials is unusual. It could be that you could say that that's exotic, but it's the composition, it's how you build the craft, the materials that form the craft and everything inside the craft. It's quite exotic because one of the company's leadership was a young material scientist when he graduated with his doctorate in material science from one of the universities in Illinois back in 1970. And he was hired by Ben Rich to work with him and a team at Skunkworks. That was the Advanced Projects Development Agency, I think is what Lockheed aircraft, as we called it back in those days. So, so basically, this is what he was telling me. He's an advanced material scientist, and he said, well, we could use the best diagnostic equipment we had back in those days, which was 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we could see the elements through mass spectroscopy that compose these structures. But when we look at how they're composed and structured, it's like nothing we've been able to fabricate on Earth. We've never been able to reproduce it on Earth. And we have no extrapolated engineering or physics technology to tell us or inform us on how we can possibly learn how to fabricate this on Earth. So they understood that it's the combination of the elements was very unusual. It was counterintuitive, but it's the way the materials are fabricated. That's what makes it exotic.
Excellent, thank you very much, sir. Next question is going to go.
If I can't go.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely, floor is yours.
Yeah, so thank you for you guys coming today. I have to get going, but I am charging Burleson and Burchett to be here and continue on while I am not here. I will say that, I mean, the stuff that you guys have all told us today, mind-blowing. And I think, you know, going on record is even more important. So we are going to invite you back to also testify at some point. But I do have to head up, so thank you so much for your time sending this up, and we'll be back. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is going to go to Admiral Guyudet. I've got a long list of questions. We're obviously not going to get to them all. We have to try to stay on track. So it's probably going to be my last question for this, and we could go on all day, but we've got 2 other panels we have to get through, and there's going to be some new information for you. Last question before the break. Admiral Guyudet, I know that you were privy to the incidents regarding the USS Roosevelt. In fact, there's another distinguished guest we have with us here today, Ryan Graves, who's a pilot, who has been very helpful informing Congress about some of the air safety issues, because he himself has come up close and personal with one of these objects, whatever they are. Could you please provide a brief synopsis on your experience, and more importantly, what was the reaction by certain elements within the Department of Defense and some of your frustration that you experienced regarding that reporting, that type of reporting?
Thanks, Louis. Yes, I'd be glad to. So at the time of the Roosevelt UAP sightings, I was the one-star admiral in charge of all the Navy meteorologists and oceanographers, and I had aerographers mates on the ship doing the weather forecast. And as the chief meteorologist of the Navy, my responsibility was safety of flight, one of my main responsibilities. And at the time, I received an email on the Navy's classified system, secret system, and it was addressed to every subordinate under a command called Fleet Forces Command, the 4-star command that I reported to, and that the commander of the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group reported to, as well as several other units. And attached to the email was the Go Fast video that everybody's seen now and has been declassified and released to the public. And the email title was Urgent Safety of Flight Issue, and all capital letters, and it came from the operations officer of Fleet Forces Command asking if any of the recipients of the email knew what these were, these UAP, because they were having numerous near mid-air collisions, as Ryan Graves saw firsthand, his squadron mates. And then the next day, that email was wiped from my computer, and no one talked about it in any subsequent meetings at Fleet Forces Command. And this was very unusual, because the primary job of Fleet Forces Command is to prepare Navy units to deploy, like the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group. And that exercise was a critical pre-deployment requirement to get pilots certified to land on the flight deck. And so, not talking about an urgent safety of flight issue, for example, the UAP that split a section of aircraft, you don't want anything to get within a mile of an F-18 when it's operating. So that they didn't talk about it, that was covered up, didn't sit well with me. And that's the reason I have come out today, or really for the past few years, to talk about this and make sure we support all these reasons to acknowledge and be more transparent about UAP activity and data. And that's why I'm on the advisory board of Ryan's Americans for Safe Aerospace, and we've been advocating for the FAA to institute a system of reporting with standards to get more information out there to support safety of flight and science.
Excellent, Admiral Guyudet. We have a question by Representative Burleson. Go ahead, sir. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Davis, I wanted to ask before this panel's over, I want to pull some threads here. The, what is your understanding of the physics, or the likely propulsion technology? What is your assessment of what the capabilities are and how it's being achieved? And then also, I want to ask about materials and energy as well.
We can only speculate. These things are so far advanced, we can only speculate. The best speculation I can come up with is General Relativity does a great job predicting something like a warp bubble. UAP do exhibit the phenomenon of sublight or less than light speed warp bubbles. However, that becomes a challenge when you talk about UAP that dive into the ocean and climb up out of the from under the ocean and up into the air. So warp.
So it's not warping space-time.
It's a warp in space-time, yeah.
Oh, it is.
That's described in Einstein's general theory of relativity.
Yeah.
And so the problem is
It doesn't, gravity warps space-time,
that's right,
right?
yeah.
So these objects are changing space-time around them.
Yeah, they can have a thin shell of energy, and the type of energy would have to be negative energy density, and it would be consistent with the type of energy density that you can create in the quantum vacuum. And examples of that are the Casimir cavity that has a little vacuum region that's bound by the two plates of the cavity. There's also squeeze states of light where that's a laser beam where you're going to take some part of canonical noise fluctuations from out of that part of the beam you're not interested in and pile it up elsewhere in the phase space, and this is getting really technical. So, so I'll just kind of keep it this way. You're going to take the quantum vacuum fluctuations that we know as quantum noise, shot noise, and laser beams. You're going to pile it up somewhere else in an area you're not interested in measuring, and you only want to measure the amplitude of that beam. And at that point, when you take the quantum vacuum fluctuations out of that amplitude, that energy density goes negative. And the energy density is the square of the amplitude. So that goes negative. And that's an example of negative energy. The mass of the Earth creates space-time curvature.
If it was, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, so that space-time curvature, which we feel is the force of gravity on the surface of the Earth, drags down quantum vacuum fluctuations of the quantum fields that are out in space near the Earth, in the vicinity of the Earth. And that energy density happens to be negative. And so this is an example of theoretically predicted astronomical sources of negative energy as well as laboratory sources of negative energy. So that's what you would need to build a warp bubble. And that's what you would need to build a construct a shell.
Just a brief comment of clarification. We have two pillars of modern physics, quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of gravity, which is curvature of space-time.
Right.
We don't have a reliable theory that combines
That's right.
quantum gravity. So what we are hearing is speculation. We do not have the knowledge to figure out if you can create curvature of space-time out of negative energy density because we have never mastered this technology. We don't have an understanding of that. So it's possible that, a millennium from now we'll have those quantum gravity engineers. That's possible. Currently, we just, we're just like too primitive technologically to figure it out. The question is there something in possession of government that the scientists should look into? And, I would love to help government figure it out because it may guide us about the theory of quantum gravity if we have something.
Yeah. So we have good ideas about these things, and we can speculate on what the best approach to take to build a warp bubble or the shell of negative energy that will create a traversable wormhole, which would be a shortcut through space-time between two distant points. But we have craft in our possession. There are no physicists literally working in those programs. So basically mechanical, aerodynamics, aerospace, thermal control engineers, electrical engineers, and material scientists. And material science is a part of engineering often. Usually kind of overlaps chemistry as well. And they've never had a physicist like him or I. They've never had an applied physicist or an experimental physicist. And so they are really lacking in the ability to understand how these things flow.
Sir, the legacy program has been very insulated and insular, so unfortunately, it's a bit of a, forgive my approach here, but a bit of an incestuous community. There's not a whole lot of outside involvement because it is so highly classified, and that's been some of the frustration and I think challenges, technologically speaking, because we haven't been able to recently apply new talent, new ideas, new theories to what may be, what the U.S. government may be in possession of.
And what about the energy potential?
The energy is a question.
Accomplish some of
Jim-
the things we're seeing, right?
Yeah, I haven't been able to access that.
Dr. Davis, can you talk for a moment, about the Nimitz incident, the calculations for the object to go from 80,000 feet within less than a second, 50 feet over the water? What type of energy requirement are we talking about?
Hundreds of times the total electrical energy produced in the United States annually. That's the kind of energy that is representative of the observed features and performances of UAP craft, especially the Tic Tac that the Nimitz encountered in November of 2004. And so it's hundreds and hundreds of times what the United States produces annually in electrical power. And so that compares really well with interstellar spacecraft that would travel relativistic or ultra-relativistic being anywhere from 90 to 99% of the speed of light. The energy is astronomically huge. So these craft, I don't have the security clearances I need to know to get access to the technical details, but I am made to understand that the craft are consistent in size with the Tic Tac, even double in size of the Tic Tac. That would be up to about 100 feet long by 50 feet diameter of that type. Boomerang-shaped craft, arrow-shaped craft, triangular-shaped craft, and so forth. The biggest ones that had been observed, especially that we investigated at Nimitz in 1999, involving Scott Air Force Base. That one was a 600-foot long craft, and it was about roughly 100 feet tall. And so they don't have possession of craft like that. I've never been told that. It's usually the more manned scale.
Something they couldn't move.
Yeah.
So we might be able to.
Yeah, so we can only speculate. I know Jim Kasky wrote in his book, I don't remember the title of it, but anyway, it was co-authored with Colin Kelleher, who I worked with at NID, and George Knapp of KLAS TV in Las Vegas. And so Jim mentioned, and Jim was the program manager for the AAS, the OSAP, the AAS WAP, I think it was. And so basically he described in his book, somebody, I don't know if it was him because he never, I think he said it was him, went inside one of these craft that he had access to, and they couldn't recognize any propulsion or power devices or systems inside the craft. It was completely unusual. Travis Taylor and I have speculated that possibly they're teleporting energy from a remote distant location where the energy is produced, it's teleported to the craft. And that's how the craft can move around without having to carry propellant or a rocket engine or an advanced warp drive engine on it. That's one possibility that we've speculated on.
On the material, so what you have me thinking is carbon can take multiple forms, right? And are you saying that is the same with other material, other elements? The way in which what we found is different forms of these elements that we have.
It would be different alloys, it'd be different combinations of the elements.
And isotopic ratios as well, correct?
Yeah. So you're going to have a variety of whatever structural part of this that came off of UAP, and I don't know because I didn't have waveguide knowledge SAP access. I only have TS-SCI. So at the SCI level, I was informed that there would be combinations of elements from the periodic table, combinations of their isotopes. So you have a variety of elements as they naturally occur, or some isotopes of them mixed together in a certain way, and then they're structurally built in a very unusual way that even today we have no equivalent or analog to. So this is about as much as I was given information at an SCI level.
And then, do you have or can you comment on whatever species have been piloting these craft? How are they large? Are they multiple species? Are they like what is their size and how many are usually on a craft?
They're typically the multiple species. People are familiar with the Greys, the Nordics. People have talked about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the percipient of reptile or an insect type humanoid, because they have this a head and forelimbs and torso. So,
Large, small,
human size, human scale.
and are there, how many are a crew?
Well, the Greys I'm familiar with from investigating the crash at Corona, which is misnamed the crash in Roswell. It's not the crash in Roswell, it's the crash in Corona, New Mexico. Those were Greys, those were 4 foot tall. And the Nordics are typically human size, probably, I've heard 5, 6 feet tall. And same with the people who mislabel reptilian and insectoid, they're roughly that height too. I haven't heard anything about anything 7 or 8 feet or 9 feet tall of that nature.
So, dinner at a shop. Folks, what we're going to do here for time.
I think I stepped out at the wrong time.
We are going to take a 3-minute break for a change here of the panel. We'll roll right into it. If you need to use the restroom, please do so. But we are going to truncate this break significantly because we've got a lot to cover. And you definitely want to stick around for this next panel as well. Big round of applause for our panelists, please. Some of these folks have a plane to catch, so they might have to get out of here quick.
We can bring in a skiff. I like your watch, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's a 65.
I love it. I love it. And he knew cyber, so he's 82. He like, terrible. All these dots and everything.
Folks, can you please take your seats?
Yep, sir.
Take your seats, everybody. We're about to begin. And with Kirky, they're great. Thanks. All right, folks, we can shut that door. We're going to get rolling here. I want to be cognizant of the representative's time. All right, folks. The next part of this, the panel's discussion will involve national security. Before we begin, I would like to share something with you. This has not been planned, and I just received permission to share this with you this morning. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you now is because I think it's important and relevant to this next conversation with these two individuals who I'll introduce to you in a minute. Very relevant to this conversation. We talk about national security a lot, and our pilots, our men and women in uniform, who bravely fight wars for us in combat. But there's a whole sector out there that we also have to be cognizant of. That's our commercial pilots and civilian pilots. And I'm going to share with you a photograph that has never been made public. It was taken in 2021 over the Four Corners region at an altitude of approximately 21,000 feet by a private pilot outside of his aircraft. And this is a photo. I'll give a copy for Congress to see. It was taken by we have all the information on the camera, and I just received permission today to share this with you. It is a lenticular object, and when you look at the shadow being cast, it is significantly large. This is an altitude of 21,000 feet. Taken by a civilian pilot. Now, why is this important? I'll pass this around. I'll hold another copy here. Kirk, when you're finished as well, please pass it on down to them. This is taken from a civilian pilot. Right? Not a FLIR system, not an infrared system, but an average person with an average camera at 21,000 feet. And the object potentially is anywhere between 600 to 1,000 feet in diameter. It's a lenticular object, and it is silver. Now, I cannot vouch for the veracity of this photograph. I didn't take it. But this is an example of one of many, many, many involving commercial and private pilots. And guess what? They don't know where to report it. Guess what? Congress has no idea that this is happening on a regular basis. That's a problem. And why is this relevant? Because right now you're going to hear from two speakers, I'll introduce you to them in a moment, who are experts in national security and have been following this topic for some time. What I'd like to do is introduce you to Mr. Chris Mellon, first and foremost. Chris Mellon is well, I'd call him a former boss's 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 boss. He was a senior staff director, if I'm not mistaken, here in the Senate at the time with Bill Cohen, Senator Bill Cohen, and then later went to the Department of Defense and became the first, what you might call the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The position before there was a DASD, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, where basically Chris was responsible for all the intelligence equities globally for the Department of Defense, right? Anything from human operations to special access programs and everything else. Chris has been a spearhead in public engagement, getting the academic community, the scientific community, everybody, intelligence community, all to apply their efforts and time and talent and resources to this very real problem. The next individual is Mr. Kirk McConnell, former senior military officer as well, and very senior staffer on the Senate side for the Senate Armed Services Committee, who was instrumental in helping get Dr. Eric Davis to provide classified briefings to certain members of Congress. I won't say who, that's not my place to say. Kirk has been in the shadows for a very long time, and he has been extremely effective in getting this topic at the highest, to the attention of the highest levels of our government, and that to include other administrations as well, not just this one and the one before, but the one before that as well. So with that said, there's a whole lot more to go in. I could spend probably half an hour going over their academic vitae and their accomplishments, but rather what I'd like to do is spend some of that time instead and allowing them to have a discussion with you here today and some questions. I think Chris Mellon first has a presentation he'd like to provide. So I'm going to give the floor to Chris Mellon. Please welcome our new panel. Would you like to present that?
Yeah, maybe I'll come up there. Project a little better. Thank you, Lou, for that overly kind introduction. And my thanks to the congressmen for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here with us, and everyone else who contributed, especially Jordan Flowers. I just returned from South America for about 4 weeks, and promised I would not work on anything related to UAP the whole time, and got back here and made a quick turn, a little under the weather. Wouldn't have a briefing if it wasn't for Jordan and his assistants. What I want to talk about is I don't think the public is aware of the extent of our airspace vulnerabilities and failures and the degree to which they've already been exploited and are being exploited today, and the challenge that we face in trying to sort this out. I also want to pivot a little bit based on earlier conversations. I wasn't going to get into this so much, but Dr. Lowe talked about spending $1 billion or so to develop new sensors to collect information. One of my career frustrations in the intelligence community has been that we have incredible sensors that are far more than $1 billion, and we have a great many of them. And they are collecting information today which is directly pertinent to this topic, but that information is not reaching Congress, it's not reaching the scientific community. In many cases, I don't think it's reaching ARROW, which is the office that Congress established to study and evaluate this phenomenon. So if we could have the first slide, please. Where's this going to do that for me? Yeah, so here's just a little overview of topics I'm going to touch on, which is the word shocking, I think, is not an exaggeration or hyperbole in this case. We really are effectively naked from an air defense standpoint when it comes to these drones. I'll talk and provide very specific examples to illustrate that, and the UAP. Let me begin here. Okay, this is unfortunately I don't have this right in front of me, but this is a map that displays roughly the coverage provided by something called the solid-state phased array radar system. These are reportedly the most powerful emitters on the planet. If there are other civilizations in nearby solar systems, they're more likely to detect these emitters than probably anything else on our planet. How many UAP would you guess they have detected in, say, the last 20 years that have been reported to Aero? Zero. How is it possible that the most powerful radar, I've been writing about this for years, by the way, fecklessly. This is not a new fight. I've been trying to get Congress, somebody in Congress to listen to this and pay attention for years. Kirk will testify to that at the Armed Services Committee, because I keep going up there and have been for years saying, guys, how come this thing never detects any UAP? How is that possible? These are the most powerful emitters on the planet. And look at the area they cover. And oh, by the way, when you look at the area they cover, we keep having reports over and over again from tactical systems, from ships, plane, and aircraft in the areas covered by these radar. So Aegis ships, planes flown by Mr. Ryan here and his naval aviator colleagues and others are reporting UAP constantly in these areas, but somehow these systems never seem to see a UAP ever. How is that possible? And how come nobody's asking about that? Is this a Chinese balloon situation where all we need to do is tweak the filters, and lo and behold, we're going to bring into focus something which is, drones, if nothing else, they're a vital, absolutely vital air security significance. We know that in Russia and Ukraine today, drones are causing more casualties and killing more people than any other weapon system, right? So this is utterly transformed warfare as we know it. Here's a multi-billion-dollar system. It's up and running. This is the successor to the old ballistic missile early warning system. So its primary function is to detect ballistic missiles coming over the poles from Russia or China or from North Korea and to develop intercept solutions. But it also has a mission of detecting sea-launched cruise missiles and bombers and so forth. So there's one of several possibilities. Either we've spent billions of dollars on a system that's not performing as it should be, or it just, maybe needs some tweaks in the filters to expand the range of things it reports on. One of the challenges with these systems is to avoid clutter, right? Because they're so powerful, they collect so much. They've got to filter it down so what's being displayed is reasonable and appropriate to the mission. It could be a problem of that sort. Or it's simply so highly classified that the information is not reaching Aero. I favor the latter. I think that's what's going on. And I think if Congress were to poke hard on this, maybe get an Inspector General to look at these possible options, or otherwise look into this, they would get some answers.
Quick question. Is that data from that system being archived?
I believe so. I don't know how far back they go and how that's a great question. I don't know how far back it goes. And One of the things, so when you approach NORAD about this with the Air Force and you start asking about this data and what are they seeing? So right now, my understanding is, by the way, that they don't even tell Aero, whose director is supposedly cleared for everything, they don't even tell him when they scramble fighter aircraft to conduct intercepts. So they're regularly scrambling fighter aircraft. I've talked to and interviewed on television a NORAD officer who told an account of walking into Cheyenne Mountain where he, for duty, and everybody was standing on their feet looking at the big screen, and there was a UAP coming down from the Arctic along the east coast of the United States. And the commander-in-chief of NORAD said, quote, "I want that thing." And everybody said, "Yes, sir," and they were launching everything we had on the East Coast, couldn't get it near it, couldn't get a radar lock. It disappeared out over the southern Atlantic. Is that the only time that ever happened? The one time that this NORAD officer gave this account from the 1990s, when the system was much less capable than it is today, and we were seeing fewer things than we are today, and fewer intrusions over restricted airspace, I rather doubt it. This is, by the way, only one of a number of multi-billion-dollar systems that are already deployed. They're collecting data that bears directly on this topic and don't seem to be reporting anything to Aero. So Aero issued a report. In their last report, they said, we don't have anything, we haven't seen any UAP in space, but there were, I think, 40 instances in which ground-based reporters, like civilian airline pilots, reported things far above, beyond what they call the Kármán line in 100,000 feet, which is what they consider outer space for these purposes. Now, there's another system called the ground-based electro-optical deep space surveillance system, which is a ring of cameras circling the globe that does nothing but stare at the night sky all night long. How come those systems didn't detect what these pilots are talking about? They're looking up saying, I saw these bright lights moving, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's one of these cameras on top of one of our highest peaks in Hawaii, and it does nothing but stare at the night sky. That same night sky all night long, did it miss that? Was it a cloudy night? Have any of those cameras ever collected one of these incidents? They said there were 40. I would think somebody ought to take an inventory and say, we want to know which of these surveillance systems is reporting UAP and which are not, and what specifically are they reporting? Take an inventory. Again, is there a systemic problem or failure with these systems? The taxpayers spending billions of dollars, I would think we would want to know that. Now, interestingly, with regard to the GI system, I, on one occasion, had a colleague who was visiting for a sort of routine oversight purpose many years ago. And I said, while you're there, Pete, why don't you ask them if they ever seen anything strange? I didn't want to say flying saucer, but that's what I was alluding to. And he knew what I was talking about. So he asked the question, and sure enough, just the month before, on that one occasion when the question was asked, they had indeed collected photographic imagery of what was 4 or 5 objects moving through the night sky in formation, traveling parallel to the Earth's surface. I don't know that the question has ever been asked since. That was probably 20 years ago. I find it hard to believe that in all that time that they haven't collected anything relevant to this question. And I don't understand why that data is not getting to Aero. I don't know if anyone has even gotten a checklist to make sure that when Congress issued this directive and said, there's a reporting requirement now, everybody needs to report this stuff, it needs to go to the Air Force, it needs to filter down through the commands, is anything coming back up from these systems? Do these people even know they're supposed to report? And is there any reporting of that kind going on? There's another system called the Space-Based Infrared System. Multi-billion-dollar system. This is again in the unclassified domain, what I'm talking about here. There's quite a bit, additionally, that is paid for by the taxpayer that's pertinent. It's a very robust system with satellites in multiple orbits, highly elliptical orbits, geospatial orbits, very high precision. It's looking for infrared and heat kinds of events. As far as I know, they have detected, reported to ARROW 0 UAP incidents. Okay, maybe nothing happened. Maybe they haven't seen anything, but it does make you wonder. In this case, it's particularly strange since we know there are dozens, if not hundreds, of UAP incidents happening within the areas that this system is supposed to be providing coverage of. For example, the famous Nimitz incident occurred, almost directly in front of the radar at Beale Air Force Base, right off the coast, and this went on for about a week or so, and you had objects descending from 60,000 feet and back up. So I don't think anyone could say, well, they were so small and they were so close to the water, it wasn't within range of the radar. These things were at very high altitudes, and this was going on a sustained basis. So my suspicion is, now I understand that that data could be highly classified. I could understand why it might not be in the public domain. What I can't understand is why ARROW does not seem to be aware of this data, if it exists, and why the appropriate congressional committees do not seem to be aware of and informed of this. Do I realistically expect anything to happen because I'm raising this here? No, because I've been doing this for years. But what the heck? We're here, might as well try again. Let's go on to the next slide. So we have an incredible series of events that have been happening. I wrote an article a year ago to this month called "Who's Operating the Drones Plaguing the U.S. Military?" And it did actually get read by a producer for 60 Minutes, who subsequently did a piece which featured several four-star officers who in fact confirmed what I was discussing and alleging in the article with regard to the events that occurred at Langley Air Force Base and elsewhere. It is truly shocking. Here's the Air Combat Command, which is supposed to be protecting these gentlemen in this institution where we're sitting in Capitol Hill and the White House and the U.S. government, and they can't protect their own airspace. They have to move our cutting-edge F-22 fighter squadron to a Navy base from the Air Force Base. And this is going on for, I forget how long it was, a couple of weeks roughly. And we're talking about strange craft, bright lights appearing over this base, making it unsafe to fly night after night after night. And to this day, we have no idea where they were coming from. We don't know their capabilities. We don't know who was controlling them. And that remains true not just for that base and that incident, but for numerous other bases. So the first incident, and the war zone is a great source for people interested in this topic, by the way. They do terrific reporting. 2018 in Guam, we've installed a $1.5 billion anti-ballistic missile system. And these brightly lit small craft show up, they go right to the THAAD missile battery, and they're shining bright lights down on it like they're photographing. And this happens 2 nights in a row. So back in 2018, it wasn't as apparent as it is now, but obviously those drones could have been weaponized. They could have easily taken that battery out. and eviscerated the ballistic missile defense on our leading facility in the Pacific. Not to mention the fact, I just went to that to Google Maps this morning to check that air base, and that air base, like Langley and like so many others, has very few hardened shelters. So those multi-hundred-million-dollar aircraft that are on the runway could easily be destroyed by drones that are costing, what, a few $1,000? Okay, that's how vulnerable we are. Then in 2019, we began to see this activity off the coast of the United States in California. And I'll read a little excerpt from one of those reports. USS Paul Hamilton observed 4 UAS with a closest point of approach approximately 200 yards off the bow, port and starboard beams. They had a on-time station of approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. So if you have children and you have drones at home, you know that they usually have a maximum time of about 20 minutes. Okay, these were in station for 2 hours and 20 minutes, 60, 80 miles off the shore, not apparent where they could have been launched from, what their total dwell time was. The anti-UAS systems on the ship were ineffective in bringing them down. The first UAS spotted by lookouts at 2:40, observed with a single white light. They go on to report others within 500 yards, maneuvering fore and aft with 4 white lights and a flashing red light. They're not trying to be sly. They're not trying to be clandestine. Approximately 200 yards above the ship, again, maneuvering right around the ship, back and forth, up and down. They went to the bridge of the ship with a powerful searchlight or photographic device. So we've had cases where they go right up to the bridge of the ship and shine a bright light in on the captain and the senior crew. That's how overt and provocative this is, and that apparently reflects their degree of confidence that we can't intercept them and bring them down, whoever it is that's operating them. That same year, we began to see them around nuclear power plants. In 2020, very strange situation out west. This went on not just for weeks, this went on for months. In one of the least densely populated, there's a slide that kind of shows, I think maybe it's back, roughly the part of the region we're talking about here. Yeah, eastern Colorado and western Oklahoma. So we're talking about farmland. I drove out west of the ski last winter and drove kind of through the area. It is incredibly sparsely populated. There's very, very, very little there, and yet these drones were operating in groups, clusters, as many as 40 drones at a time. They formed this was so extensive, and there was so much eventual furor raised among the ranchers and farmers that they formed a task force involving the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement. They deployed a special plane that the governor of California authorized that had sensors on it. And this continued to occur, and we never found out where these things were coming from, who was operating them. I called a sheriff there and spoke to him about it. He told me a fascinating story. He said he was actually a deputy sheriff, but the sheriff was also a witness. They responded to a call, and there were a group of these lights over this farm, and a brighter light came in, a larger light, and the smaller lights went inside of it. And it took off at an extreme velocity and passed almost directly over the sheriff and the deputy. And he told me, I've never seen anything move that fast. He's also in the military reserves, this individual. So, and that report, by the way, he called it a mothership. It's not just a story that I happened to hear. If you look at the documentation from Air Force Office of Special Investigation, the FBI, and so forth, you'll see written documentation from other witnesses that refers to a mothership. So this is actually well documented, very strange and very concerning. We don't know what is operating in our airspace, and this continues, often in militarily sensitive areas. 2023, Arizona test ranges. You've heard about Langley, but we do a lot of flying in the Southwest. Flying conditions are great. It's a terrific place for the Air Force. We have large Air Force bases there. And some of the strange things we're seeing in the number and the rate and frequency with which this is happening is extraordinary. So this includes, now your average drone is restricted to a flight of 450 feet. We've got F-35s and F-22s, well in this case F-35s. They're encountering drones at 15,000 feet, 17,000 feet, 35,000 feet, going 500 miles per hour in restricted military airspace. Meanwhile, in an adjacent area, and I included in my PowerPoint briefing, you can find videos from the Department of Homeland Security, 9 of them, about some of the strange things that they're seeing on the border. Very, very odd things. Now, this raises a little bit of an issue that I've written about recently also, with the hope that it might prove of some assistance to this task force, which is, why is it the Department of Homeland Security can publish all these videos, but Aero can't and DOD can't? There was a hearing before Congress a few years ago with Mr. Bray from the Navy, and he said, I assure you, I'm going to review these videos and make sure that we get out to you and the public everything we can. I think maybe there's been one video in 3 years since then. When I've looked into this and talked to people at different parts of the federal government and Aero and so forth, they've basically said nobody feels it's their job to turn this over to the public. Nobody wants to make the effort to submit it for public release. So back in 2017, I provided 3 unclassified videos to the New York Times. You've all seen those, Gimbal, FLIR, GoFast, right? There are a lot more like that. They just haven't been released because shortly after that, somebody created a classification guide which suddenly said, in contradiction to the executive order on classification signed by the president, that anything, essentially anything having to do with UAP is now suddenly, mystically classified because it might damage national security. Even though those 3 videos, the FBI, the Office of Special Investigations, the Air Force investigated, confirmed they were classified. Not only did they not damage national security, they helped national security. They helped raise an awareness for the public and for Congress that we have an air defense problem here. And the scientific community is very eager to get more of those kinds of videos because they want to train AI systems, they want to know what it is we're looking for, they want to measure the signatures. There's a lot they can contribute to this, but the bureaucracy is not responding. And I think I couldn't put a number on it, but I believe that if someone were to poke that system and force them to review that classification guide, if someone were to establish some advocacy for taking that which is truly unclassified, and admittedly, absolutely, there are many things, videos that are appropriately classified, not questioning that. What I am saying is that there are others that fall into this camp that would have value to the public, value to Congress, value to the scientific community, and this is not an expensive proposition. It's just a matter of getting somebody to focus on it and put these through the process. And I think the public not only has a right to know, I think it's beyond that. I think there's a utilitarian function. There's great value in the public knowing this information, value to the scientific community in having this information. I give the example sometimes of what happened was, and I promise I'm going to get off the stage like real fast. I'm starting to fall into my own stuff here that I get into. But the Sputnik program, I have no doubt if they could have kept it secret, the CIA would not have told the American people the Russians had a satellite in orbit. And we wouldn't have had the space program when we did. We wouldn't have gotten to the moon when we did. Because the people would have gotten fired up and said, oh my God, this is not acceptable that the Russians are ahead of us and we need to act. And Congress took action. And it was, it actually, ironically, we ended up collaborating with the Russians in space. And it actually helped facilitate some peaceful developments and relations. I think there are a lot of benefits along those lines that they could accrue. But it's going to take some effort and on the part of Congress, I think, to compel this to happen if it's going to happen. So with that, I will close and thank our congressional sponsors for taking an interest in this and giving us the opportunity to express our concerns and share what we've learned thus far about this problem. Thank you.
Can I ask a 5-second question? This high-resolution 4K videos of UAP, is this stuff that you know about, or is this stuff that you've seen?
Well, there's some stuff that I've seen and I've asked about, and I think there's one video I've seen that they're going to declassify. And I hope that happens. It wasn't I would say it was 4K. It was more like what you've seen, is infrared sensor, gun camera video along the lines of what the New York Times published and the Washington Post subsequently. So it's that kind of video from that sensor system.
So we know it exists. It's there.
Oh, yeah. And now, by the way, we're at a point now where the Arrow has received somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,800 military reports. 1,800 in just the last few years. Some of those are iPhone videos, so I don't think there's a big sources of methods issue there. There's a variety of, some are from, stuff you get at Best Buy from sailors on the ship with a video camera, like that. There's got to be a number in that mix that could be revealed. And beyond that, as I said, I think there's a lot of high caliber sensor data. The American people have already paid for many of these sensors. They're out there, many of them, and they're collecting pertinent data. Avi Dr. Loeb has benefited from the data that had to do with the reentry of the interstellar vehicle. It was a great example of a taxpayer-funded system that contributed to science in a very meaningful way. I'm here to tell you, I think there's a lot more of that kind of thing that could be made available if someone did a thorough assessment of the sensor systems that we have and what they're collecting, and took a hard look at the classification issues. We also had a system, precedent ones, where we cleared for global warming some scientists to look at some classified data related to that scientific problem set, and that's conceivably another, there's problems with that because scientists want to be able to publish, of course. They want their colleagues to be able to see everything possible about the sources, but there are a variety of opportunities I think we're missing. At the same time, there's a huge national security issue here. And we've got stuff in our skies, some of it could represent technological surprise that we need to find out about. And you've got these unmanned systems at 35,000 feet. That's a mile higher than the top of Mount Everest, going 500 miles an hour in restricted military airspace. I would say we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you, Chris. Justice, I do not have the advantage of height that you do, so I have to bring this way down. I think Chris brings up a very good point. And the reason why I decided to share this photograph with you, taken from a civilian pilot now, is because the same challenges that our pilots, or military pilots, are facing as to where to report it, who's going to analyze it, what do you do with the information, multiply that for the civilian aviation community. Do they report to the FAA? Do they report to NORA? Maybe the Air Force? Maybe the civilian organization, right? Who's responsible for getting this information out? Again, let me caveat, this has not been vetted. This was taken by a civilian pilot. But once again, you would think this information would be important for somebody to look at. Certainly someone in government, certainly some of our representatives that are sitting here, right? If these are over sensitive military installations, whose are they? What are their capabilities? What are the intent? Right? But enough of me right now. Let's go on to our second expert here, Mr. Kirk McConnell. You know, I could sit here all day. Once again, these guests are just unbelievable. Kirk, my question is for you, and I'm going to go off script here for a minute. You have deep expertise and experience with the Senate Armed Services Committee. What is right now the greatest challenge you see for our Congress to tackle this topic on behalf of the American people? What is, if you had to narrow it down to one to three challenges, especially for our reps here that are sitting with us here today, so patiently, what would be, in your estimate, the three greatest challenges facing Congress tackling this topic?
Well, I would speculate. I'm not an elected official.
Can you all hear back there? No. Okay, let's go ahead.
Either that one or on your left.
How's that?
Perfect.
I certainly don't want to speak for Congress. You know, I do want to mention that I did serve 37 years as a staff member on Capitol Hill for Senate Armed Services Committee and both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. I was not in the military. You got that wrong. So I've been up here a long time, but I have no voting card. Never have. I have tremendous respect for the institution, and I don't intend to reveal sort of inside baseball information. You know, what I would say is, on a topic like this, my sense is that Congress needs a lot of confidence to push really vigorously. And where are they going to get that confidence that there is an absolute assurance that there's a reality here? And I think as much evidence as has been accumulated in the public domain over such a long period of time, it is subject to question. And we all know how that has proceeded over the period of decades. The key to this, in my opinion, is firsthand sources who can testify to direct involvement in this so-called legacy program of crash retrievals, reverse engineering. Unfortunately, there are people out there, I believe, from many reports, that are interested in coming forward and telling their story, but they are very much intimidated and frightened about doing that. They're afraid of the consequences, including their own personal safety, is what they relate. Their personal safety, certainly their career, starting with their security clearances, which is the means that they have to make a living. And they have observed some folks who have come forward, not to mention you, Lou, and Dave Brush, and have seen what those folks have gone through, most of them say, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I think we're sort of in a tough situation. It's almost like, catch-22. We need more primary sources, but it's hard to get people with that kind of information to come forward because of the fear of retaliation.
We need a better whistleblower.
Sir, that's something that I'm sure, as you know, has been discussed in both the Senate and the House.
Why don't you draw me something up really tight?
Yes, sir. So whistleblower protections is and finding ways to even compensate them if they do have negative consequences from coming forward, and so forth. So I certainly think this is a major factor. I would just let you ask the next question.
Absolutely, Chris, please jump in.
Yeah, so there was, I came prepared to address that issue as well. And I came prepared to contribute what I could to that question as well. But the classified session was canceled. I think due to the sensitivity of the names of the individuals and so forth. I didn't think it was appropriate to, those ones I could do it in an unclassified setting. If they do reschedule a classified setting, I think I'm more than happy to try to provide some specifics. I published a signal message I received from a very senior government official. He described a specific Secretary of the Air Force memorandum. He described a specific recovery site. He named the Air Force gatekeeper for the program. Nobody from Congress has asked me to follow up on that. I have all that information. I was prepared to share what I could about that, but I don't know that it would be definitive or lead to any conclusion, but I do think those names, due to the privacy concerns of the individuals and so forth, obviously it's pretty sensitive. So I'm prepared to try to help with that as I can as well. But in this session, I wanted to address some of these other issues related to declassification.
Let me ask a general question to either of you. What are the consequences, and either or both of you can answer, what are the consequences of Congress not taking action on this topic from a national security perspective?
Well, you heard Dr. Eric Davis expressing his understanding of the state of affairs in this arena, which is that the program, the legacy program, call it that, has been sort of stalled. That we're not making the best use of, allegedly, we're not making the best use of the best minds in the country. The compartmentalization allegedly has prevented the kind of coordination and collaboration between scientists to really crack this very difficult set of physics problems. I'm sure that the security element that's had to be applied to this activity has come with a lot of costs in terms of effectively managing the program. And it is alleged that this even extends within the executive branch, that very senior leaders in the executive branch aren't aware of this and are not, managing the effort. So it's not a leap or a stretch to suppose that we're hampering ourselves immensely justify this continued compartmentation. And certainly Congress does not know whether this activity is being managed appropriately or not. We don't know if it's got the right level of resources, if it's got the right management structure, the right incentives, and so on and so forth. We think our government can work pretty well when we're managing things according to the rules. So I think that this is a detriment to national security, the lack of oversight and awareness. It's certainly possible to keep appropriately classified things classified and still have effective oversight and management both in the executive branch and Congress.
Speaking of keeping national security and secrets classified, which I completely agree with, there are very specific reasons why we want to keep certain aspects of this topic classified, sources and methods, etc., maybe certain capabilities. But let me ask, this is a question probably for you, Mr. Mellon. In your opinion, what are the
Mellon.
I'm trying
When did I
to
become Mr. Mellon?
well, because the fact I'm not wearing a tie, I have to make up for it somewhere.
Okay.
So I've already been accused of being
He's not used to seeing me in the suit.
too casual and too lax, so I'm trying to be more formal here. Chris, in your opinion, what are the consequences of retroactively classifying information previously unclassified, and are you aware of any specific incidents of information or data that was once unclassified that is now classified?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Lou, I think there's piles of that stuff. And I think there's so much of it, it's kind of hard to gauge what the consequences are. Because my understanding is that they adopted the classification guide, which basically says anything and everything to do with the UAP is classified hereforth. Now, people who haven't read the executive order may not be aware. The executive order says, when in doubt, you should err on the side of going unclassified. You're supposed to err on the side of transparency and openness to the American people. And when we're talking about many of these videos, if an F-18 at-FLIR targeting pod video was unclassified in 2017, and we're not talking about denied area or some other unusual exception, how could it be classified 2 years when you take the same video from the same system in the same area 2 years later? I don't get it. But that looks like what they did. And it avoids, it's typical, I argued vociferously against it at the time. I knew some of the people involved and tried to make the argument to them, guys, we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't be having a discussion if information hadn't gotten into the public domain via Congress and the press. And that's why we made the progress we made to date. And now you want to drop the curtain on everything? What do I don't get it. So I can't really gauge the implications, but I do think they're negative, and I think it's inappropriate. I think it's probably unlawful.
My last question here before we move to a very short break for the next panel. I want to be respectful of time of both the congressional members and, of course, our panelists as well. This next question goes to you, Kirk. You mentioned a little bit about whistleblowers, and I know that, from my understanding, and you don't have to talk about it, but I know you received classified briefings before on this topic from specific subject matter experts and some of your colleagues. What can Congress do, specifically members such as Rep. Burleson, Rep. Burchett, Rep. Luna, their colleagues, to better protect whistleblowers, to incentivize individuals to come forward and provide, at a minimum, unclassified information in a way that they don't have to worry about retribution to their careers and perhaps much worse, and classified information in the proper venue? What can Congress do to help improve that flow of information and minimize the reprisals that some of us have faced in the past.
Lou, I would first off like to say that, there is an option, like people who do come forward and want to talk to committees in Congress don't have to go public. They can and have come to the Armed Services Committees, the Intelligence Committees, and in confidence, on a classified basis, have related what they know and what their experience has been. The members who have received that kind of accounts and witness statements have protected the identity of such people, and they have thereby been protected. The negative side of that is that the members can't go around and tell their colleagues what they have learned, because that risks the identity of people that have come forward in confidence, and therefore it doesn't empower members to then proselytize and get everyone geared up to really make a strong investigatory push. But it is an option for people to consider. I would also say that we have a gentleman here in the audience who has conducted a legal history of people who come forward to make classified statements to Congress over a long period of time. And he tells me that he can't find an instance where someone coming forward and giving classified information to Congress without sort of formal permission from the executive branch, that there's never been, I hope I'm getting this right, there's never been an indictment or much less a prosecution for doing that. Now, I certainly, I'm not a lawyer, and I certainly don't want to encourage people to sort of break the rules as they see, as they understand them, and what they're bound to by agreements that they sign. But it is at least something to think about, and potentially act on. That obviously takes a lot of courage to do that.
I'd just like to, this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but our panel's coming to an end, and I did want to share a concern I have, which is that we have two different issues here. We have UAP objects that we're observing in flight, active around military facilities, we have an issue of possible recovery of materials. These two issues in the public mind are blended. It's entirely possible that we might not have recovered materials, but UAP are very real. And here addressing, and it's an urgent issue. And I have a concern that if that issue is not in some way validated or addressed, it runs the risk of discrediting the entire topic. And we've made enormous progress. Nothing happened essentially from the Blue Book days until 2017. And I fear that if there isn't some effective way of addressing this, that we run the risk of a major setback. I don't know how secure Arrow is in the long term. I'm not seeing interest on the part of the chairman of the committees that fund it, on the Armed Services and Intelligence committees. They don't seem to be engaged or supportive at this point for a defensive approach. So I think we're in somewhat tenuous ground. Kirk might be probably in a better position to address this than me, but I think that the second thing that Paul's made, if you were to confirm that, then how do you manage that? Who deals with that? It's such a transformational issue that it cannot be a press release that comes out from a you know, from Congress some afternoon, Friday afternoon or something. It's a literally cosmic issue that runs the risk of having terrifying tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, frankly. So it's a very complex, interrelated set of issues, and I think we and whoever in Congress is providing oversight of this really needs to think through how to handle the two of those things. And our foundation obviously wants to help if we can, but I think it's a tough challenge for members who are very, very busy people with a lot on their plates and a complex one.
I'm going to make an exception. I'm going to continue this conversation because there's a question I want to ask. It's very, very important related to with their expertise. Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, I wanted to get to the question that you actually asked me, which is about whistleblower protections. And I'm by no means an expert or even really conversant on the topic of whistleblower protections. But you know, applying a common sense kind of standard, you know, you need to have legislation that really is strong. You know, there's a long record of whistleblowers, despite whistleblower protections in the law, they get retaliated against, and they lose their jobs, they lose their careers, and it happens with enough regularity that no one could blame people for not wanting to risk it. So the legislation would need to be very robust, and I think it would need to include things like restitution, possibility of the government making good on the loss of their career, loss of security clearances, if it comes to that, and making making sure that that people are not going to suffer these consequences, even though the law says they should never have suffered those consequences. You got to clean up the mess that tends to happen. So anyway, I'll limit myself to those.
So one last question. I know you said it before. I'm going to again break the rule here real quick, but I'm going to ask you very quickly. Let's try to, if we can, a question, but try to keep it succinct if we can. And this is for both of you. And I think this is part of the challenge that Congress faces. Okay, so we all want to protect national security. How do you separate protecting Blue Force technologies, perhaps hypothetically, gained from the insights of UAP recovery programs, but at the same time leveling with the American people about the reality, the fundamental reality that we do not have a current understanding of everything in our sky, right? Our U.S. air domain awareness, we do not have a complete sight picture. And two, that there may be technologies that are not from us and that warrant further investigation, again, but at the same time protecting if we have any technologies, hypothetically, that have been developed as a result.
Well, Lou, we heard from Dr. Davis and many others who believe that we haven't made much progress with respect to deciphering what the physics are behind NHI and these craft that are coming here. At the same time, we don't really know that is true. We haven't made progress. Maybe we've made great progress, and that we have stuff ourselves that could be pretty marvelous, right? And certainly there can be absolutely vital reasons for protecting that kind of information. One thought that has crossed my mind is, people say, if the United States government has been into this, why in the world wouldn't the government have made these kinds of technologies known for the betterment of our citizens and for mankind? And, one thought is like, what if once you understand the science, what if the engineering, I know Eric Davis thinks that we're maybe 1,000 years from being able to do this, but what if what if it's not true? And the government is on the horns of a dilemma. Like, it's got energy sources that might be an absolute boon to mankind, but it also is looking at the weaponization of that, and it's terrifying. And so, is there a way that you can exploit that for your own benefit militarily, but keeping this thing somehow, this genie bottled up, where it doesn't come into the hands of a North Korean dictator? So I don't have answers. Lou, I think you've got to deal with this range of possibilities. But the first thing you got to do is understand it. Like, we have to understand what the government knows. And until we do, it's going to be hard to develop a rational strategy for managing this. I don't know if that's
Chris?
I don't think I think we can manage it. I'll leave it at that. I've said too much already, and I'm eager to get off the stage and turn it over to others.
All right, folks, 3 minutes. Thank you very much for coming. please take your seats. Folks, please take your seats.
I get the same way when I see you.
Folks, please. Folks, please take your seats. Anybody who's standing up, please take your seats unless you are part of the camera group. So folks, let me first extend my sincere appreciation and thanks for everyone's patience. As you can see, we could probably stay all day with just one panelist alone. Lots to discuss. We are barely scratching the surface here. The next discussion is really going to be part of a scientific discussion. And so the two panelists you have here are experts in their own fields and recognized as a global leader in their particular expertise. So what I'd like to do first is introduce Ms. Anna Brady Estevez, founding partner at American Deep Tech, former SBA Innovation Advisor for Kaufman Fellow, and on the UAP DF Advisory Board. But what you may not know is that Ms. Brady Estevez is deeply involved with the National Science Foundation. And that involvement really includes looking at pioneering new ways to invest American talent, scientific talent, into new and emerging areas of science. Right? Where do we decide to put our money and our effort in the next 20 years? Right? Where do we get that return on investment? What does that look like? Right? And how do we force ourselves to think outside the box to be creative? Don't invent tomorrow's technology. Invent the technology after tomorrow. Okay? And it's that type of creative thinking that has traditionally kept this country ahead of everybody else. And I ask you to, when she speaks, listen to what she has to say. Because this is, in my opinion, this is the future. Not just of this topic, but any topic requiring innovation. Because if you don't innovate, you stagnate. If you don't stagnate, you perish. That's just the bottom line. Right? We live in a competitive world. The next individual is a colleague and friend of mine, Mr. Mike Gold. Mr. Mike Gold is president of the Civil and International Space at Redwire, member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, former NASA Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, former Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations and Senior Advisor to the Administrator for International and Legal Affairs, former Vice President for Civil Space at Maxar Technologies, former Director of DC Operations and Business Growth at Bigelow Aerospace. You might remember that word from somewhere else and that involvement. And last but certainly not least, as a member of NASA, am I correct to say a mission manager with the Artemis team? Did I get that right? Because I've got two things wrong so far today, so I want to make sure you're right.
I'm a recovering attorney. They wouldn't let me close the prior mission. So I was the architect of the Artemis Accords, however, the global partnership of 54 countries to explore the moon, Mars, and beyond.
Excellent. And that's it, right? explore moon, Mars, and beyond. There is something for you to consider. there was an estimate done that the future of mankind, our species, is not here. In fact, if you were to look at the financial opportunities, it was estimated that 1 times 10 to the 18th power amount of money this world has ever made globally in all its time as modern civilization. Multiply that by a factor of 18, and that's the value of the resources that lie within the inner asteroid belt of our solar system. Right? So the future is there. As a microbiologist and immunologist, there's one primary directive of all life systems that we know, and that's to expand. If you don't expand, you will perish. In fact, you can look at a petri dish, and if you put the right amount of nutrients, bacteria will do the same. Take a plant, give it nutrients and water, it will grow and take over. That is the primary directive of all life, and we are no exception to that. So keep that in mind as these two individuals are going to talk to you about the importance of this topic, the UAP topic, and how it relates to the scientific community. Am I mistaken that you have a presentation for us? So what I'd like to do is turn it over. First of all, welcome our two guests, our esteemed guests. And ma'am, did you have a presentation, or are you going to do the just questions and answers?
I'll go verbal, yeah.
Okay, verbal, got it. Mike, come on up and let's get you started.
Thanks so much. Is it okay if I do it from here? Yeah, great. Sure. Wonderful. In terms of expansion, I can tell you my doctor says I'm expanding far too much every day.
Yeah, me too. I'm in the same boat.
A lot of trouble. Thank you so much, Lou, not only for today, but for all you have done to push this topic. You are an American hero, as well as the congressman and many others in this room, from the journalists to the scientists, to the advocates, to the pilots. It's just an honor to be here, and I appreciate what everyone has done. Also, thank you, Redwire Board of Directors, for letting me out of the meeting early. That was a wonderful discussion. I think this is going to be a lot more exciting. If I could point you to my opening slide, that is actually an image taken by the Blue Ghost lunar lander with Redwire Argus cameras. I'm going to get in why that is such an extraordinary image in a moment. But before we get there, we were having a discussion about substances and what these new substances look like, new materials, what this UAP technology would be. And I've been given the challenging, if not an enviable task of saying, how could UAP technology impact innovation without knowing quite what that UAP technology is, even fundamentally? So what I'd like to try and do today is give you an example of how microgravity is impacting innovation in really almost every industrial field, and how that could be transformative. I don't know if extraterrestrial civilizations are using this. I think they likely would be, but I think this is an example of how a fundamental shift in technology can change everything. Our company, Redwire, has been conducting experiments on the International Space Station, on the space shuttle, for literally decades. We've flown hundreds of experiments over the past 35 plus years. We have 11 experiments active on the International Space Station right now, more than any other company. You see Senator John Glenn running one of our experiments there. The first one I'd like to show you is the biofabrication facility, the BFF. We're great at acronyms at Redwire. If you can play the video, please. This is, by the way, an over 400-pound payload. It broke a table at our facility in Greenville, Indiana. Much easier to handle in orbit. That astronaut, a Cubs fan, working very quickly, a lot of coffee, 20 times speed, but he's installing what is a biofabrication unit. And that system has allowed us to manufacture human tissue in space. It resulted in the first human meniscus being printed in space. Who needs a meniscus? No idea. Probably use two, right? Exactly. This is the impact of microgravity, that if you tried to create that meniscus on Earth, and again, I'm a recovering attorney, so I'm going to put it simply, it squishes. You couldn't do that in a gravity environment. It's not space per se, it's the lack of gravity that allows you to do these incredible things. Subsequent to the success we had with the meniscus, we printed live cardiovascular tissue. And we brought it back from the International Space Station, still live. Think what this could mean for people suffering from heart disease, the creation of heart patches. And of course, the goal of all of this is ultimately to create whole organs in space. How many of us have had friends and relatives die while waiting on an organ donation list? This could change all of that. Additionally, because we would be using your own stem cells to create the tissue, the organs, we would avoid the dangerous and expensive anti-rejection therapies that you go through. So we see how microgravity could have a dramatic impact in terms of life sciences. Also, pharmaceuticals. Redwire has flown 28 pillboxes. These are systems where we take pharmaceuticals, drugs, fly the seed crystals. And seed crystals, by the way, they're like a sourdough starting kit. They're what the drugs are made out of. And when you create seed crystals in microgravity, they're larger, more uniform, and that results in drugs with better efficacy, better longevity, fewer side effects. Here's an example that is very near and dear to my heart, insulin. We partnered with Eli Lilly, we flew insulin. Over on the left side of that, that's what insulin seed crystals look like when you create them on Earth. Over on the right side, that's what insulin looks like in space, the seed crystals. Again, I got a B- in biology as a high school student. Even I can tell the difference between one and the other. And because of those larger, more uniform crystals, you could have a version of insulin. We've seen versions of cancer treatment drugs that, whereas you have to go through chemotherapy that will be injected, again, long, painful, you could potentially get to a version of the drug where it could be administered orally. So a tremendous difference here relative to the pharmaceutical sector. And by the way, it's not just us who know this, it's China. And the Chinese have their space station, they're going after this same research. So, Congressman, I would invite, as we look at the International Space Station, replacing it with the commercial space station, this revolution with biotech and microgravity is going to happen. The only question, is it going to happen here in America, in the free world, or is it going to be happening in China? And I do not want to be buying my next generation of pharmaceuticals and drugs from the Chinese. So we need to continue to support this, create new developments, but this is just life sciences and biotech. Again, micrograv will impact semiconductors, the same principles. When you form crystals in space, you can create new types of semiconductors that are more powerful, more tolerant of heat. Agriculture, you can create seeds, new types of plants that can flourish in the desert. We have a greenhouse that we're flying in space, looking at many of that efforts. You see that there. We also have systems for what's called Z-band fiber, where it's a new type of fiber optic that can be incredibly more powerful. Again, every aspect of our technological society could be changed by this innovation. Is this something that UAP are using? Is this new substances that they're using? I don't know, perhaps. But you see how this field will revolutionize everything. And I believe in the future, the leaders in microgravity will not only be the leaders in economics, but in national security as well. As a matter of fact, that meniscus sprint, the customer for that was the Uniformed Services University, because the number one injury to our men and women in uniform are meniscus tears. Now I'd like to talk about, who wants to see some unclassified data, right? Let's talk about some imagery that we're getting from NASA. As Lou mentioned, I was proud to be a member of NASA's UAP independent study team. We had some very common sense recommendations, one of which that I testified here in the House not too long ago, alongside the great Lou Elizondo and others, was that we need to go into the NASA archives, get the imagery, review it, make it public, and look at what we've got. This is an example that hit the internet not too long ago. Is it a Tic Tac? It's on Mars? I don't know. I'm not qualified to say, but someone should be looking at it, and we should be collecting and collating the data. Here's one that's even more interesting to me. Lunar horizon glow. This is a phenomenon that we first saw with the surveyor systems. This is, as it's named, a glow that we're seeing on the horizon of the moon. We saw it with the robotic surveyors, and what you see in the upper left-hand side are sketches that Apollo astronauts made of this phenomenon. A glowing dome, streaks of light shooting out from the lunar surface, pretty extraordinary. And then, most recently, this was my cover slide, with the Blue Ghost system, which is NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, CLPS, a wonderful public-private partnership to reach the moon. With Redwire Argus cameras, we took this image of the lunar horizon glow. What you might hear, if you go on a NASA website or talk to some in the scientific community, is that this effect is from dust that has been electrostatically charged and then levitated to create this impact. Now, again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but Dr., I should go back to give him credit, Dr. Manischew's direct child, I'm gonna mess up his name, I apologize, it's in the slides, but a wonderful professor who's been associated with the UAP Disclosure Fund and doing work on this topic, provided me these slides. And I can tell you NASA's own research, LADI, other systems, is putting some big question marks as to even if there is enough dust to create this effect, which looks unlikely, and that if dust could be electrostatically charged to cause what looks like a second sunrise. And that's not the sun, by the way, it's below the horizon. That is an extraordinary image. And by the way, when I first saw this picture, I was like, is that algae on the moon? And what you're seeing is light refraction occurring due to, I don't know what. So I don't know what this is. Is it a dome? Is it some type of natural phenomenon that we don't understand or aren't aware of? But I'll tell you, definitely, it's a unidentified anomalous phenomenon, which bears looking at and bears understanding. And this is a good example, too, of even if it's a natural or prosaic phenomenon, there's something extraordinary occurring here. We should be delving into it. We should be studying it and understanding it. And on the off chance that it does turn out to be something extraordinary, we need to know what is occurring here. Additionally, here's another shot, publicly available from the NASA archives. You've seen some imagery of the triangular UAPs in the past. What's that? Debris? Satellites?
That's from the moon, right?
That's Apollo 17.
We had that picture.
Images from Apollo 17.
A few of us saw something like that last Friday.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Satellites, debris, Klingons. What is it? I don't know. Lou, do you know? Congressman, do you know what that is? Why are we not investigating this? And what I would ask of our brave members of Congress who are here is, again, with relatively little effort and money, we should be leveraging AI and ML to go into the NASA archives, so much of it has been digitized, more every day, and conduct a review of what's publicly available on UAP. We spend so much time here, and justifiably so, talking about classified material, what's being hidden. Yet there is a treasure trove of data that, if not a smoking gun, certainly is fascinating and worth looking at and applying the scientific method to. And these images that you're seeing here, and here's more of another UAP from Apollo, more of potentially a Stonehenge, strange structures on the moon, lunar anomalies that look like Buddhist temples. And I'm not saying necessarily all of these have extraordinary explanations. Maybe some of them don't, maybe some of them do. But it certainly is worth the effort to investigate. And we're not doing that right now. Why? Because of the stigma, this pernicious stigma that prevents us from tackling it. And sir, that's where we're going to need your help. That I have many friends at NASA that are interested in this topic, fascinated by it, want to delve into it, but they need top cover. And that's why I'm so grateful to maybe offline talk more about what we can do with a new NASA administrator coming in. And this isn't going to cost a lot of money. This could be done with very little time, very little effort, yet the results could be extraordinary. Finally, as we get back to technology, I just wanted to level set relative to what it takes to travel in space. 3 days to the moon, 7 to 10 months to Mars. I can tell you exposure to radiation during that trip, quite dangerous and challenging. 77,000 years to Proxima Centauri, our closest star. That's worse than my flights on United. That was rough. And then 1.7 million years to get to where we've seen some biosignatures for the first time. If we're truly going to explore space, we're going to need some innovative technology. And here we already spent some time discussing the Alcubierre warp drive. This was a Mexican physicist who did the initial work proving that within demonstrated science, and I would defer to Eric Davis here, but this is not extraordinary science, that a warp drive could exist. The challenge with Alcubierre's warp drive is that it would require roughly the mass of Jupiter converted into energy to operate. I mean, I had a Chevy Suburban, and that was not fuel efficient. This would be even more difficult. But scientists at NASA, what was then NASA's Eagle Works, tweaked basically the architecture of the Alcubierre warp drive, and perhaps found some ways to get that down to more the mass of a VW, something that we could work with. So these are the kinds of technologies that if there is a gravitic system or some kind of extraordinary technology, we must have it in order to reverse those distances and have America and our international partners lead in space exploration. Additionally, energy. I mean, if we are sitting on extraordinary technology, zero-point energy, the Casimir effect, as we discussed, think of the good we could do in terms of saving the environment, improving the economy, creating a post-scarcity society. It would be extraordinary, it would be wonderful. And let me just end by saying the reverse of that is we do not want to fall behind China relative to leveraging extraordinary technology. I don't know if there's alien tech out there. There may be, there might not be, but can we risk falling behind the Chinese in reverse engineering if there is such technology? And this is, again, where the stigma is so pernicious. That I'm sure China, as its top officials, working on this 24/7, coordinated, whereas us, it's separated, it's compartmentalized, it's MIT working on it, it's Caltech working on it. No. We cannot risk losing communist China because we can't take this issue seriously. We must not let a lack of vision turn into a lack of freedom. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for the brief presentation, folks. Again, time is of the essence, so I'm going to make these as succinct as possible.
Is it okay if I present as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to present. I was going to ask you questions actually about that, so please, have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate, Mike, all the work you've done in microgravity, and certainly for any of these craft that are that are in space above the one government, they have that access to microgravity should they choose to use it. At our firm, American Deep Tech, we're very focused on a number of areas of deep technology, including space tech, energy, and advanced bio, including one of our co-founders, Kat with Aspera. They believe they've identified a cancer kill switch, and I know you work together.
We're talking with her.
Yeah, it's a cancer kill switch in microgravity. So just, for pharmaceuticals that access to microgravity, you see the aging within 9 days, and it would take a year terrestrially for a tumor. So that ability to speed up that iteration on drug development is very important. So we've got some really interesting people that we work with, a CTO coming out of NASA, a branch chief coming out of Space Force, some very high growth entrepreneurs. And we also work with some leaders, as our advisors and venture partners in the UAP space, because we see the keys, of these areas of technology to drive that abundance, that competitive advantage, and just societal benefits. So people like we're fortunate to have as our advisor Hal Puthoff, and also to work with people like Julia Mossbridge and Ryan Graves and Diane Finkhausen. So I know that they are active in so many areas of technology, but also in UAP. And so how did we come, in my former roles, which I thank you so much for that kind introduction, which I've completed my roles in the U.S. government, where I was the co-chair alongside NASA of the U.S. Space Economy Interagency Working Group. We worked with exceptional innovation forward, UAP forward and open leaders across the interagency, and those meetings are public, they're available online, U.S. Space Disruptors Day. And that was a day of about 10, sometimes 12 hours of presentations on in-space biotechnology, in-space semiconductors, U.S. launch, also UAP, also advanced consciousness, AI, communications and satellites. So there was actually interagency leadership that co-hosted this UAP leading content from NASA, Space Force, DOE, DHHS, Air Force. These were all very senior people, NSF and SBA. So while I would say that in years past, before this great movement towards transparency and gratitude for those in the room who have really led that, since the 2017 timeframe and before, time has changed. And innovation is not about, unfortunately, because we want everybody to come along. We appreciate, it's great once you get beyond 50%. Innovation and science are not about consensus. This isn't, we don't wait to get to 51%. This is, the leaders are doing this. The fast followers are also doing this. And the reasons why they're doing this is because they're sitting in rooms, groups of people. We had an extended electrodynamics group of leaders from across the interagency and also the private sector, and they were working on advanced energy. They were working on advanced communications. They're funded entrepreneurs. At NSF Public Awards, we funded, and I funded companies working on what the entrepreneurs later described as UAP adjacent or UAP inspired technologies. One of those, actually, multiple of those people have spoken, having worked on programs that they can't go into great depth about, but certainly others are undertaking that private sector research where it's not about it being classified first. And this, but the point on how do you get your communications back and forth to Mars, without dealing with the 40-minute latency? How do you do that? And what are the approaches for breaking those barriers? How do you achieve this energy abundance and that more efficient launch capability? So it was these conversations on what could be achieved and what's already been in some cases declassified in terms of work and outcomes, or was never classified, really led to conversations where we invited in experts who then said, do you want my extended electrodynamics presentation, or you want my UAP presentation? We said, we'd like both of those. And so what that led to was receiving that tremendous presentation from Hal, from Charles Chase, and from others, and saying, actually, can you give this to more people? And so they gave those types of presentations to hundreds of people. And what we found with those entrepreneurs was this was the highest level of engagement we ever got in any field of science or technology. I'm seeing people in the audience who are part of it shaking their heads yes. So the entrepreneurs were so eager, and scientists, to engage in the UAP science and technology. And as a frame of reference, when we talk about disruptive technology, I've worked with a few of them because I've had the opportunity to fund around 400 companies, so work with thousands of entrepreneurs. Those companies, from just a quarter billion plus put out, have gone on to raise $8.5 billion in follow-on financing and $17.5 billion in total market cap just in the early years. That's coming out of a place that the program, which is not the UAP program, but a program that has catalyzed well over $350 billion, from well less than 20, probably 12 billion put out over several decades. So these entrepreneurs, oftentimes these highest growth ones, regardless of what they're working in, it can be batteries, they're told never gonna work. I mean, we all have batteries, right? People will say a higher performing battery, here's why it's not gonna work. So these entrepreneurs are used to being told no and why not, and they still build things. And what's happening today, not just in America, but around the world, because the first time I saw these experiences was overseas, is people are seeing ultra advanced craft that are higher performing. And for people that are building the highest performing craft and the highest performing energy, they are not trying to unsee what they have seen, and that they've caught on a wide range of sensors. There is the classified sensors, and then there's the sensors like this. We have imagery, on our phones from going out and seeing things. So I think that the impetus to build things is what's driving this. And what would be the right levels to really go after this? You know, this is something that a few of us have spoken about, but my background's also as a strategist, so we do a lot of strategy math. And I used to be at BCG. And the question of, if you're building the highest performing systems, what type of resources would you put in place? So if we look at, you know, and I'm sharing kind of casually Googled numbers so we can get to better definition. But how much money went into the ISS, our long-term in-space laboratory? Some of the numbers online say that it was well over $70 billion for the US part of that, and that with other nations' contributions, it might be $150 billion. What was the cost of the Apollo program? That was $26 billion, from the 60s to the 70s. Some estimates put that at inflation adjusted well over 200, perhaps $250 billion. So if you were to ask me today, what is the right amount of money to be investing in these ultra high performing technologies, these Manhattan style projects, it's well into the hundreds of billions of dollars. That's the right answer today. Whether the US makes that investment or whether somebody else does, we are talking about advantage for multi-trillion-dollar markets. So some would say perhaps we made the right investments over time, that we've invested those tens of billions, those hundreds of billions. And if we have, how do we celebrate the accomplishments that might have come out of those programs? How do we give the recognition to those scientists, those people who have served, who perhaps have not been able to speak about their work? How do we derive value from that? How do we say these pieces that might have been constrained because you didn't have access to the tools everybody else has access to on the outside and the collaboration, how can we bring the pieces in a way that is respectful to national security and increases resilience and abundance? And I am concerned, I mean, I appreciate, I think many of us want transparency, but also, how do we make that so that the people who may have worked in this want to come forward? You know, so if we're offering them, oh, you built something, you're given resources, and here's some punishment, that's going to be hard to get the technology out. And there's lots of ways that could be brought fully forth. It could be anonymized into a centralized clearinghouse. If there's valuable technology there that can help people in the United States and around the world, let's celebrate what's been built and let's fill the gaps that are there. So we see tremendous opportunity. The race is on. Some would say those are exceptionally large programs. Many of us have seen this wide range of phenomena, be they craft, be they orbs. The reason it matters, so sometimes the first time you see this phenomena, it's a point of interest, and you say, wow, I kind of thought there was life off planet, whether it's life off planet or advanced terrestrial technology, but you think, well, okay, interesting, now back to our day-to-day, what do we do with this? And so a number of us came to, because our core roles were advanced energy, advanced computation, advanced biology, the answer was people who are working in their core fields, biotechnology, quantum, that they're seeing some of the potential paths forward through this UAP adjacent technology. Can we classify it today? I don't know how. I mean, there are parts that we can say, stay away from this due to this risk. But the challenge on some of this is, if you're to say, well, classify UAP technology, you just got to stop working on it. For people that are familiar with the science and the technology, there are elements of this that are relevant to quantum and quantum entanglement. So what does that mean for our national posture on quantum? AI is interwoven with this. You talk about microgravity and advanced materials. So do we just not do certain layering or advancement of certain materials because they've been found in crash retrieval? We're not able to walk back because this is so interwoven. So saying that UAP is off limits, that's like saying, let's go home. Let's, maybe, can we still use fire? Maybe, let's look into it. Can you still use rocks? So many of the fields of technology would be off limits. So honestly, we don't know how to to, this idea, once you're in that, you don't even know, it's like saying stop using math. So the entrepreneurs are getting inspired, they're seeing things, and so this is kind of humorous to scientists. So we both appreciate that people are talking about crash retrievals and reverse engineering. Are there crash retrievals? Well, are there crashes? I mean, there's deer retrievals where I live. I mean, a crash seems a lot more interesting than a deer to pick up. And anybody who knows an engineer says the first time you see anything of interest, you are certainly going to reverse engineer it. So whether that happens inside government programs or whether it happens out in the streets, Americans and people around the world are seeing this phenomena, and those that build things are saying, what do we build together? So we've seen these on a number of occasions. We've brought some high-ranking scientists down to folks who are able, in spots where these show up more frequently. And it's worth noting that there are people, a number of groups of people who are currently pulling in or attracting craft, and other phenomena. And some people just happen to see them. I'm looking right at you, Ron. You saw a lot of these. But so there are people that have seen these infrequently. There are people who have seen these on a day-to-day basis. When we've spoken with scientists, over the past year or two, and so this is coming out of places that some would see as the scientific establishment, and can we talk about this, can we not? And some of these conversations hadn't taken place as openly. When they did, what we found was, when we go into rooms and we talk with people who are innovators, it's usually 30 to 50% of people will share that they've seen or experienced anomalous phenomena. And sometimes they say, oh no, I haven't seen a UAP. And then they say, well, I did see this orb over a football field, and it was huge. And then, so people have seen things, and we've had to have the conversation with leaders in science where we say, by the way, times have changed. There's all this great work that's been done towards disclosure, and when we started talking to people about it, where we might have thought it was 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, seems like it's more like 1 in 3 or 2 in 3 or maybe 3 in 3 and 3 people aren't talking about it. And so we've had the conversation, which is, it is not credible or viable to act like this isn't going on. So it's a little, we use the analogy that it's a little bit like whale watching. It's both normal to, if you live by the coast only, certainly. But if you live by the coast, you have access to get on the water, there's a percentage of people who would have seen whales, there's a percentage who haven't. It's normal both ways, so nothing to feel like, special or not special, regardless. But it's ubiquitous. So if you can't go in front of a room of people, if you've seen that, and it's credible, and if you haven't seen it, we say, listen, people are saying this, they know. So to be credible, you do need to acknowledge it's out there. There's so much data, there's so much people have on their iPhones, there's so many people who will speak to the programs on the high side they're in, but the low side, is not waiting for agreement. They're not, the Fortune 1, the US government can lead this. We can try to figure out what benefit we have from the great work people in this country and perhaps around the world have done, or people are ready to move forward. And when I was in government, I used to receive proposals, without going into the details in any of them, in various fields of technology, where people think they were the only ones who are going to say, no. Any idea you have, believe me, dozens of people are working at the same time. So this is something that right now, both in this country and around the world, there are so many people that are eager to build this, and a number of them are already building these things up. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it isn't happening all over the place, both in this country and abroad. So if we need to lead, if we want to lead, we need to be active. So I'm looking, we always listen with respect to innovators and entrepreneurs, and I want to thank so many of you for sharing what you've seen. There is an opportunity. I expect more scientists are going to be engaging directly with the phenomena, and as scientists, they're going to be doing experiments and methods. Okay, so if you want to talk about something that people talk even less about than UAPs. So the thing that was even more of a third rail than UAPs is the sources and methods for some of this. So as you're hearing about, there's a number of teams that are working calling this phenomena, and they're talking about all these different things. Some of them have these, ultra exotic protocols. And then one of the groups that we went to visit with some scientists their protocol was prayer. And it was not some exotic thing, it was the Our Father, the Hail Mary, you know, conversation, and I'm not trying to constrain it to any denomination or any faith or lack thereof, because I think one of the hesitancies people have is they want this to be for everybody and not to be specific or linked with one thing. But sources and methods, when we're talking science, there are people through meditation or very, you know, day-by-day prayer are calling in these craft, you know, and these orbs. So it's science. Let's talk about what it is and then assess it.
Well, thank you. So my first question actually is to you, Anna. So there was a recent statement by a government official, and it kind of went unnoticed. I think it was a few weeks ago, where they said we are now manipulating space-time. We have the ability to manipulate space-time. So I'll let that sink in for a moment. That was an official statement by a U.S. government representative. You can elaborate on that.
Well, there's certainly been publicly visible funding that has gone into that. And I'll say a couple things before I would say there's a much better expert in the audience, Dr. Julia Mossbridge, in terms of space-time work. Also, that's something that Dr. Hal Kutoff with space-time metric engineering has been very active in. So there's been plenty of work on that, and there's a lot that's going on.
So in the backdrop of that, the National Science Foundation has been a fundamental...
Oh, and sorry, just one quick thing to say. But by the way, we also, a few of us were also, maybe several of us in the room, about over a year ago, were on the National Mall at the National Academy of Sciences, where it was National Space Week. And there were some presenters from around the world, and that also included a representative from the Chinese government, presumably the CCP. And the presentation that they were putting up included requests for, we want to work with people on, I believe it was space-time metric engineering, it was gravitational control, and it was also alien life off planet, amongst other things like renewables. So the Chinese are literally coming down to the National Mall and saying, hi, come talk to us about this. You know, and so, come on, seriously? Another thing that they said, by the way, you know, in terms of many of us have been advocating for much higher levels of capital to go into innovation and also into in-space infrastructure, which does not have access to the terrestrial financial tools, like debt. You know, so if you buy a house, most people, they're making a smaller down payment, 20%, 5%, whatever they can do, more of a minimum. In space, it's typically, you've got to front all of the money up front. You're not going to build a hospital for the individual patient. You need to have the financial model. So anyways, when I was trying to figure out what was the space budget for China, they wouldn't tell me. But the gentleman did look at me in disdain. You know, he's talking to all of you. He said, when we look at putting up a space station, we view that as that costs the same amount of money as putting down a couple of kilometers of metro. Basically, we're going to do that all day, every day. So if we can't figure out how to make the investments to win in these transformational markets for abundance, for societal benefits, and for economic growth and gain, we're going to be left behind. So so the people that are moving forward. We really hope that the U.S. government, the Fortune 1, you know, is able to share some of the great work that's been done, you know, previously across all these fields, but the private sector is moving forward.
Folks, we're going to have time for only two very quick questions. We're already way over our time, and we have to unfortunately surrender this room back over to folks. So let me finish. I've got two here, and then afterwards, if you want to get with our guests, you can. We're not going to have time to open it up right now for public questions. Let me get to this real quick. And if we could, our guests could please keep the answer as succinct as possible before we actually get kicked out of the room. Let me start with you, Anna. The National Science Foundation has been a fundamental pillar of some of America's revolutionary technology and concepts for many decades. How can the NSF help the government now concerning the topic of UAPs?
Well, I guess one of the things that's just publicly visible is that we have been, when I was formerly at NSF, I would just say that there's lots of publicly visible content of us being very forward on the topic, listening to innovators, working with strong colleagues from across the interagency. So I think that NSF has shown, and NSF leadership has also just been extremely supportive. So I just want to be very clear. I left the government because I'm excited about building things in the private sector, and I only ever received the greatest support and collaboration from my interagency colleagues and from the agencies with which I worked, who are extremely forward on all areas of innovation, but certainly UAP fits within that, including our publicly visible awards that were made to fund UAP science. There's great people that are highly supportive, particularly over there.
Excellent, very encouraging, thank you. Mike, last question. You were on the NASA UAP independent study team. My question for you is, what were the recommendations of the NASA UAP independent study team, and how should those recommendations be implemented?
For the purpose of time, Lou, thank you for that question. I'll focus on two of those recommendations. We already discussed going through the NASA archives with an AI ML system to get the data, just a few examples of which we were able to show today, again, which could be quite extraordinary. Candidly, I think there are companies that would even volunteer to do that work for NASA. But the second one, and I really appreciate you showing that photo, which was taken by a commercial pilot. And one of the great disappointments I had when I was on the UAP independent study team was I was asking the FAA, how many reports have you gotten from commercial pilots? Are those reports being archived? How are we keeping track of that? And I got confusion and no straight answers. And here I'd like to give credit to Brian Graves again for suggesting that we leverage NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS, which has been operating for decades, has hundreds of thousands of cases. And this is a confidential system where pilots, crew can call in about safety anomalies that they've experienced. It's worked phenomenally well. We should be leveraging this system for the reporting of UAP. It can be done quickly, it can be done efficiently, and the amount of data that we will receive would be amazing. Additionally, the images that I showed you was from LUGOS, the Commercial Human Payload Services Program. Public-private partnerships have driven all of this. I'm so excited for the democratization of space and the data that we will get from that. This was just one example today. As SpaceX, Blue Origin, Redwire, other companies move forward, all with their own cameras, all with their own systems, we're going to get a lot more data. But NASA still holds on to a lot of it. So, for example, with what I presented, we need the raw data. We need timestamps. We need data in a format where we can do true academic research. So if we were just to do those two things, and again, we do support from Congress, I think, to push that, I think NASA could play a tremendously important role, and particularly the aviation community and the commercial space community. The amount of data we get, I think, will completely shift the level of sophistication on this topic.
And I think there's also probably about 20 or 30 hours of some of that forward interagency content in the Space Disruptors Day and the Ecosystemic Futures podcast, which we have Diane in the room here today. So thank you, Diane, for helping get that information out broadly.
I do have to say, though, I'm a little less optimistic than Anna relative to the adoption in government. As I said during my testimony, that particularly academic members of the NASA UAP independent study team were threatened, outright threatened. Not for saying UAP are real, but for just having the temerity of even reviewing the topic. You can't do science in that environment. And part of the reason that I'm calling for Congress to help is there's still a great deal of skepticism, even just at NASA, and careers that get ended just for having, again, the temerity of the research for it. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to push for real science, objective science, overcome that stigma. Let's get to the data, because our economy and our national security may be depending on it.
And I think you contributed so much. So what I would say is some of the things that you experienced, or that Lou, and Chris and others experienced, there's that body of having been able to point to those leaders. So we had the advantage of being able to point to your study, you know, into this prior work. So, you know, and again, I think there's the opportunity for the government, but I would say that it's not, there are industries that move forward that are not forwarded by the government, but I think just to be something very important that came out, because sometimes if we say, oh, UAP this, UAP that, there's going to be some great technologies that come out of that. That is very fluffy, you know, and who cares? So I think something that I got briefed on in an unclassified, just informal, no classification level environment, and both in personal capacity, but then I later brought that person in to brief others in the agency, is there real and meaningful technologies that have come from these programs? And I think with a lot of this information, you're gonna see that, you know, the story about it has been in the internet for decades, perhaps. So what I have, though, on from a very credible source was that, yes, there are people who say that this came out of the UAP programs when we talk about lasers and semiconductors. And that was so important, you know, semiconductors, the top 10 companies today, a $6.5 trillion industry that we all benefit from and underpins our global economy. That is something that it's not just, oh, maybe we'll get something. It's that there are tremendous people who have built things, you know, both in classified and unclassified environments. And that's been, you know, put out by so many authors and people in the news, but some are in environments that we can say this is taken seriously, and those people have told the government that yes, there's been real advantage on some of these most important core technologies from coming from crash retrievals.
And I think to get the government to take it seriously, we need to engage the public. We've got to get outside the UAP bubble. And Dan Farrow did a tremendous movie, Age of Disclosure. It's really a blue story in many ways. It's extraordinary. Himself and Jay Stratton. If we can touch the public, if we can get them engaged, if we can get them the same information that we just saw, I think that would be completely transformative.
Well, let me, since time is of the essence, first of all, thank you sincerely for your participation. It was a fantastic conversation. Let me leave a couple thoughts here, if I may, before we say final farewell. One of the recommendations we made to Congress is the generation of a national intelligence strategy that would be promulgated on an annual basis, just like we do for other hard targets. It's a system that we have perfected already. And then right on the heels of that, a national strategy every year, annual strategy on UAP drone. Basically, any unattributed objects that are in our skies, we should have a strategy for it, because we're seeing both on the combat field and even in the streets of New York, we're seeing technologies that we can't really explain, and frankly could be used against us in a very nefarious way if we don't get a handle on it. Two, what I'd like to do is propose, and hopefully Congress at some point will be open to this, that we should do a forum like this every year for the American public and for the media, and allow Congress to get to the bottom of things and ask the questions that they normally wouldn't be able to ask, and bring in the Department of Justice and the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and bring them all here. Why not? Right? Sitting down here in front of the American people, by the way I look at it, you're paying their paychecks anyways, right? They kind of owe you some answers, and they owe Congress some answers. I would also say, please let your members of Congress know that you support this. If you like what Representative Burleson and Representative Luna and Burchett and others have done here today, let them know, right? They need to hear this. And so other members of Congress can see this and say, hey, that works, right? Tell them that. They need to hear that feedback, unless you don't want one of these again. But that would be my suggestion. Last but not least, I want to thank specifically our members of Congress, because at the end of the day, they're your representatives. They represent this country. They are very much part of this country. And they are the reasons why you are all here today and we are here. They have facilitated this. They have sponsored this. They have gone out of their way to put their political careers potentially in jeopardy for even having this conversation for you. So if you appreciate this, let them know. And last but not least, thank you to every one of you. Again, our friends in the media, the folks that came over here, some cases came from across the world and traveled here very long distances to be with us here today. Thank you very much. very meaningful, and we are only here because it's been a group effort. So with that said, let's give a round of applause to our guests here, and a huge round of applause for Rep. Burleson, who started out. We are happy to take us out of this room, so with no further ado, this meeting is now